15-page minutes from, I may do
They're
it yet.
really long.
I know, but they're good though, but I'm not ready for all the minutes.
That's fine. Oh, I know. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Nope. Well acquainted.
If you have any comments or anything you want to say during the meeting, we'd ask you to identify yourself. We'd ask you first to get the microphone, identify yourself and your street address. The microphone does not broadcast here. It's strictly for the audio track for Medfield TV, so people at home can hear who's talking. And at this point, if we would take a moment of appreciation for our troops serving over the Middle East and elsewhere in the country. Thank you. Mike Marcucci is running a little bit late, so what we're going to do is jump right to some action items first, so he's here for our appointments. Presumably, he's only running a little bit late, so for those of you who thought you were going to be in and out right away, shouldn't be all that long, Jeff. Yes, exactly. So the first item that we have on the action item list is the Medfield Energy Committee. Fred Davis, Chair, requests the Selectmen vote to appoint Jim Nail, David Stevenson, Alex Stevens, and Tricia Pembroke to the Energy Committee.
So moved.
Okay, I second. All those in favor?
Yes.
Aye. That passes. This is the stuff you don't see after all the discussions when we get to these things. We're just so incredibly efficient and fast. It's truly awesome. Second item is DPW Director Maurice Goulet requests the Selectmen to vote to sign Chapter 90 reimbursement requests for Project Stone Seal on various streets in the amount of $111,510.
So moved.
Second, all those in favor?
Yep.
All right, passes. Third action item, Town Planner Sarah Raposa requests the Selectmen to vote to sign adoption of the Town of Medfield Hazard Mitigation Plan update for 2019. I went through the folder and I noticed there's a proclamation. Do we have to read that proclamation, or we just sign it?
No, just sign it.
We just sign it. Oh,
Just sign it.
it's so much fun to read
If
proclamations.
you would like to read it,
No,
that's
no,
fine
no.
too.
No.
I didn't write it, so I have no ownership, so.
Yeah, it's a lot shorter than they used to be.
So moved.
Second, all those in favor?
Yep.
Aye. Passed. And finally, Selectmen are requested to vote to appoint Melissa Coughlin to the Board of Health.
So moved.
Second, all those in favor?
Yep.
Aye, passed.
So the Board of Health is up to 5 members now. That was great to get that up
They
to.
need to all get sworn in. I don't think they all have.
Yeah, there's one comment I wanted to make about, we probably should have this discussion when Mike is here as well, but if you recall, when Carol Reed first was added to the Board of Health, it was actually a 3-member board. That slot had been kept open because the Board of Health was hoping to find an engineer to step into that slot. At the time we appointed Carol Reed, we basically said, well, if you find the engineer, we'll increase the Board of Health to 5 members. We are actually increasing the Board of Health to 5 members, but we do not yet have an engineer. So we have a full Board of Health, but in terms of what we had discussed doing a few months ago, we've basically opted to have a 5-member Board of Health.
So I actually had a meeting with Carol since she was here and talked to us about that. It was an interesting meeting because it was held at the high school track. We walked and talked. So it was an exercise meeting, and she basically told me that that's not an important feature to have an engineer, that they have in her opinion, they've got the staff, the professional staff, that does the things that the engineer needs to do. And so that she was just expressing her own opinion that it's not essential to have an engineer to be on the Board of Health.
Well, we'll let the Board of Health.
I wouldn't
Figure that
necessarily agree with that, but it's a function of how much development they've been involved with, because that's where the engineering comes in, is when they're reviewing drainage,
Oh, yeah.
subdivisions,
All right.
or other developments, which they really haven't had experience doing since she's been on, so.
Yeah, yeah.
Otherwise, you're totally dependent on your consultant if you don't have any basis for making an independent determination.
Having said that, I don't directly know all of the new members of the Board of Health, but of the ones I do, I'm optimistic that we've put some strong people on the Board of Health, so
Yeah, I
that's a good
agree.
thing. Can we do the consent, maybe
I would do
consent?
that.
And I would just make the comment that the people that joined the Energy Committee tonight that were appointed are very strong candidates too, so it's really nice to see the Energy Committee getting more robust.
All right, let's jump to the consent agenda. We have several requests on the consent agenda. Medfield Transfer Station and Recycling Committee request permission to post signs from October 4th through October 18th, promoting October is Green Month in Medfield. The Medfield Lions, Barbara Gips, member, requests a one-day wine and malt beverage permit for the Lions Senior Christmas Luncheon at St. Edward's Church, 11 a.m. to 2:20 p.m. 2:20 p.m. Not 2:23, 2:20 p.m. on Saturday, December 14th, 2019. The Medfield Lions Club requests permission to post signs October 19th to November 2nd, announcing the annual Chowderfest to be held November 2nd, 2019 at the center. The Medfield High School Swim and Dive Team requests permission to hold a fundraising car wash behind Town Hall on Saturday, October 6th, 2019, from 9 a.m. to noon. The Medfield Garden Club requests permission to place signs announcing annual holiday green sale to be held Saturday, December 7th, 2019. Signs in place 1 week prior to the event. And that's it.
I would move the consent agenda.
And before we vote, Evelyn, I assume none of those dates presented conflicts? Okay, then I second. All those in favor?
Yep.
Okay, consent agenda is passed. Let's see.
I would take up the cyclocross race.
Okay. We can do that. So we'll jump down to, oh, here he is. There he is. Good. We'll start easy. That's
Hey,
quite
Mike.
all right. You'll be astonished at how much we've gotten done. There's very little left on the agenda here.
I probably would be astonished.
Just to
Yeah.
we'll give you a chance to get into the flow here, we'll jump to the appointment on the Greg Bonnet discussing plans for the second annual cyclocross race on December 14th, 2019 at the State Hospital site. So,
Great, thank you.
Okay.
I brought copies in case anyone needs them.
great, thank you.
Thank you.
I still have last year's.
You do, it hasn't
Yeah,
changed.
it hasn't changed, okay.
They're very nicely done, Greg.
Oh, thank you very much. So again, my name is Greg Bonnet, 1 Maplewood Road. So I wanted to just kind of bring us up to date. The days are getting cooler and shorter, so it's cyclocross season. We're excited to submit our proposal to host another race this year at Medfield State Hospital. There'll be some slight changes to the schedule. We're moving it a week back, which I think is actually probably beneficial to the town, given we're no longer conflicting with holiday festivities. So it'll be Saturday, December 14th. I don't know if anyone recalls, last year we had a pretty successful event. We had our largest turnout ever in the history of the event, our first year in Medfield, with 700 pre-regs, 550 racers starting. No complaints, no calls for service, no issues there, so that was good. I think it was a successful event, and we raised almost $4,000 for the Medfield Foundation and the Medfield Rail Trail in the process. There's all sorts of details in here. I don't know how much you want me to go through. There was one kind of minor adjustment to our proposal for this year. We'd like to request for Zealous Brewing to have a license or to file for a permit to pour beer from noon till the end of the event on the day of the event.
Okay.
But otherwise, everything should be the same ground rules, same constraints.
Any, Mike or Pete, any comments?
No, I think just on the liquor license, Zealous will have to apply themselves. and whoever's
Yes,
gonna be
Greg
doing
and I talked about that. They'll
Yeah.
come in and we'll put that on the agenda for
So
the
we
next
can't, we
meeting.
can't give that to you tonight.
I understand. Great.
So I had one question based on the very nice materials that you circulated to us in advance. I was surprised to see the condition of the grass. You had pictures that showed it after the race and then in the spring, and it certainly had totally grown in, but I hadn't realized the grass had gotten that damaged at the time of the race. I guess I never got
Yeah.
up and saw it
There
at that
was.
time. So it just had to wait till the spring to grow in, I guess.
Yeah, there was one spot south facing on the front lawn that got sun and warmed up in the sunlight and then turned to mud throughout the course of the race. And throughout the actual day, I was sitting and speaking with John on and off, John Thompson, and asked him what his thoughts were, and he felt it wouldn't be an issue, and he was right. It grew in on its own over the spring, and we've been in touch throughout the summer as well, just making sure everything was okay. So,
Have you been in touch with John Thompson about the request again this year or not?
yes, I have. Yep.
And he has no problems?
He's supportive. Yep.
Excellent. I have no more questions then, thank you.
Great.
I would move that we,
Just
Oh,
a
go ahead.
couple of minor points. First off, for anyone who's not familiar with it, last year's event, from everything I saw when I visited and everything I heard afterward, this is, I think, ranks up there as a good-sized event that attracted a lot of people of a lot of different ages and was well-run. It certainly helped to have the right kind of weather, so if there was only one
Yeah.
spot on the south lawn that had some damaged lawn, I'm not sure that you can guarantee that we'll have this frozen ground as we had that one. But the event was very good, well-received. I think it gave good publicity to Medfield State Hospital. Christine and I talked briefly this afternoon. I think beyond getting the liquor license, there'll be I think Chief Garrett would like a detail.
Yeah, we'll talk about
So-
that with Zealous.
so that'll
We'll
be
need a
Zealous,
detail because
okay.
there will be alcohol served on the site.
Okay, and then
Yep.
if you've talked directly with Greg on
Yes.
the other issue around promotion.
Yeah,
of the
we
event.
talked about the
Yeah.
promotion and making sure it was respectful towards the
Absolutely.
former hospital.
Okay.
Yep. Absolutely.
and seeing the pictures online last year of the people going over their handlebars, the certificate of insurance would be greatly appreciated.
Yes, we are fully bonded and insured.
And you give the town a certificate of insurance?
Yes, I believe.
Yes,
we
they
provided
signed a similar license agreement to when we do the car show or other things that
Yeah.
occur at the state hospital.
And it's a level of insurance that's typical for a race like this that carries those types of exposures. So, great.
All right. Yes, Bill. I need a microphone over there, Bill.
I just wanted to congratulate you on how well everything went last year and how much the property was respected. Christine, I may have not heard your comment, but I would ask again that you make sure that the participants are aware of keeping out of the state-owned pieces of the property, since there'll be stuff going on up there. There may very well be some construction later in the fall here, so I don't expect that it will interfere with anything that you want to do, especially on a weekend. But again, good luck.
Thank you very much, Bill. Appreciate it. Yep.
As I recall, was it the tape, like demolition tape or something? I remember there was-
Explosives.
Yeah, explosives,
yeah.
so, who knows, but.
We tried to scare people into following the rules.
Yeah,
so,
they pretty much did. I just remember seeing that and going, that's pretty
Yeah.
smart.
Yep.
Let them think about it. So, okay.
Well, thank you very much.
So I would move that we permit it in accordance with the application.
Aye, second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, that passes. Now we can get back on track with our scheduled appointments, I think.
Yes.
So we'll start off with Dr. Jeff Marsden, School Superintendent. How about school buses?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to you this evening. We had an awesome start to our school year, very positive, but we have one issue that we need to address, and that's the parking of our school buses. Last year, we were informed that we would no longer be able to park our school buses at the American Legion because it was sold. That had been the parking place for many, many years. So we looked at a lot of town-owned places and other places around town. Montrose School was our number one choice based on location and the size of the lot that they have there. It made perfect sense. So our Director of Finance and Operations, Michael LaFrancesca, met with them on a couple of occasions, asking them to grant us permission to do that. They brought it up to their board, and their board denied that. So then we were in a situation where we had to scramble a little bit because we had some other spots in mind, but wanted to make sure that we were all set for late August opening of school. So we reached out to Kevin Ryder and looked at the Hinckley spot. And, certainly it had enough room, enough space for the 19 buses and one minibus that we have. He talked to his board. They gave us permission, so we started parking the buses there right before school started. But that's become very problematic for residents in Green Street. The traffic, the noise, the starting of the buses early in the morning. So that wasn't our intent to upset any of the residents. So I'd like to ask if you could consider us looking at state hospital land and other places, any other town-owned land that we could park our buses. We've looked at the state hospital, looking at probably the land right by the road where there's a parking area where people park to walk their dogs, right by the guard shack. We looked at that spot. We're hoping that we can either park there, all 19 buses, or if we would split and put some there and some over at Wheelock. Wheelock's difficult because of the many activities that are up there on the weekend. So we don't think we can fit all of our buses up there. But we're kind of in a situation where even if we do look at the state hospital, we're going to have to adjust some routes because some routes start on that side of town and then we have to adjust some of the time. So it's going to be problematic either way. But I just wanted to, on behalf of the school department and the school committee, ask if we could look at the state hospital, if that would be an option for us to park buses.
Any reactions?
I mean, there's plenty of room up there.
There's plenty of
I don't see
room
why
up
you
there,
couldn't
Mike.
park all 19 of them up there.
Yes.
You know, so I think that would be fine. And, you know, on that side of the hospital, there aren't any neighbors to get upset about it, so.
I think what we would, if we were granted permission, we would also look at putting some cameras up there. We put cameras into the American Legion. We actually had an incident over the weekend at Hinckley where folks got on the bus over the weekend. So being that far out of town and away from the main part of town, we're just a little concerned about that. So we would, if we're granted permission, we would look at putting cameras up there as well.
From a vandalism standpoint, potential vandalism standpoint, I'd almost wonder if it wouldn't be better to park them farther onto the property where there is paved areas
Right.
there. As far as I'm concerned, put it in either place.
So we looked at that as well, Gus, and the feeling that we had when we talked to the bus company reps as well is that because it's so far back away from the road, that there really might even invite more vandalism based on the fact that it was, but it's a great area with all the paved road back there. It's really a good spot.
Yeah.
So we'd just like your consideration.
Sure.
I hesitate to speak for John Thompson, but my only concern would be the issue of parking a large number of vehicles there would be in terms of potential oil spills or anything else. Or and I'm not looking for any more environmental issues up at the hospital.
It's not much different than when we've leased the property to the movie companies and we, put 50, 60 vehicles in that front parking lot, or at the car show, which we do actually
Right.
on the grounds of the property.
Right.
So I don't see an issue with that.
And you don't have any current issues wherever you
No.
parked before with spills or anything like that.
No, no.
I just raise
Yeah.
it's a remote possibility,
Sure.
but I just wanted to bring it up.
Yeah, when you're up behind the Legion, that was actually a stone, the parking lot was paved, but where you actually had the buses was
And there was no
stone.
issues
I
with
don't
anything
think
back
there were
there.
any issues there, so that would, Mike, sure.
So,
You send the
You need a
microphone
microphone?
over. Mike to Mike.
Mike to Mike.
Part of our contract is that the bus company has to provide brand-new buses every 3 years.
So not a lot of leaking going on, is that what we're saying?
There isn't.
Okay.
and there's not enough room at the DPW garage outside?
Where, Mike?
DPW
No, not
garage?
inside.
Yeah, we didn't
Where's
think so. We
Yeah.
looked at a lot of parcels of land. We looked at across from the center where the helicopter landing areas, that circle, you could actually put them in a half circle up there, but we felt it wouldn't be great for Kingsbury in that area up there, so. We've looked behind Sluggers Academy, that area back there, we looked all in there. Again, it wasn't great. It wasn't great. Montrose was probably, again, was our top pick, but didn't work out for us.
And generally speaking, you want to put them all together.
We'd like to.
Yeah.
I mean, the other option of putting half and half is that the routes that start on that side of town could be at Wheelock, and that side of town could be the state hospital. That's what we're looking at. But I think the bus company's preference would be to have all of them in one spot.
I don't have any objections.
No.
So I had a couple of thoughts. My first thought was that, as I thought about it, because I assumed that you were looking to move them somewhere when I saw this on the agenda, and my first thought was that Montrose, as you did, was the perfect spot. And so that what I was thinking was that maybe it's perhaps as a matter of municipal comity, we could ask them to, we provide them all kinds of services for ambulance, police, fire. Perhaps someone could, maybe Michael, you could reach out to them and say, gee whiz, the town gives you all kinds of services. We really would like to put the buses there. That strikes me as the best spot, but,
Yeah.
and it is on pavement, so that if there is any leakage, then it's not likely to get into the aquifer. If the hospital works, if Montrose doesn't work and the hospital works for you.
We offered to pay a
I'm fine with
monthly fee as well to the
Oh, weren't you
Montrose, and they
generous?
declined.
that. Yeah.
Did they give you a reason, Jeff? Was it,
I think it wasn't worth, is that what they said, Michael? Wasn't worth what they were gonna go through, so. We thought it was great because they have probably the biggest parking lot in town, but also have that access on the back part, so we could have all the buses exit out there.
Out to Brook Street. you mean.
Right.
Yeah, so
Right.
that wouldn't affect them at all then.
Right.
So that,
Yeah. I think part of their concern as well is the condition of their parking lot, which is not in great shape. And so I
Yeah.
think their view was they would have to pave the parking lot in order to have the buses on there without damaging the buses. And so I think they had some logistical things with that as well.
Yeah,
'Cause
we
I
tried,
did
Pete.
speak to them about
We
it.
did.
I don't think the town would ask them to repave it for us, but,
would we offer to repay it for them?
oh, no, it'd be hugely expensive.
Just wondering.
I would think that's a $100,000 paving job, probably.
Well, it depends how many years they let us keep the buses.
Right.
What are you gonna pay them?
But I don't know, I think it might be worth just a try on the basis of, they do get a lot of town services, and so that, I mean, we're ready with the police, the fire, the ambulance.
Sounds like you should call them, Pete.
Yeah, I'm happy to.
Well-
I would nominate Pete to give them a call.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, I'll call him. Oh,
I-
if you want me
what
to,
I-
I'm
For,
happy to,
for our
but-
purposes tonight, I'd suggest if we don't have an objection, we go ahead and approve it. So my guess is you're looking for an answer in the short run. If you have a
appreciate
better,
that.
if you can find a better answer, then so much the better, but at least we've solved your problem and for as long as you need it solved.
That would be great.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, motion?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, okay.
Appreciate it.
Sure.
Thank you.
Jeff, can you just tell us how many kids are enrolled this year? How big is the kindergarten and the first grade classes?
Let's see, so we have 2643 as of today.
Is that up or down?
It's, so we have some kids that leave and go to private school, so we're about plus 3 or 4, I think, right now.
Oh, that's not a big change then.
Not a big change, so we had kids exit for private school, and our kindergarten is actually smaller than we anticipated. So we're actually going to go over that Thursday night at the school committee meeting because we have projections from both MSBA and NESDEC that are a little bit lower this year than what we anticipated.
Yeah. How many
so-
kids in the, like 160 then or something, 70?
Oh, no, 190s.
Oh, 190.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh.
But we anticipated over 200 this year in kindergarten.
Okay.
And it's the next 3 classes coming in that are really, again, projected to be high. So
Yeah.
we're watching that very closely. We're actually looking at meeting with a company to get a sense of what it would cost to put modules in at Memorial to ease some of the growth over there. So again, we're not saying we want to do that, but we want to be prepared in case we need to.
My 30-year-old nephew's class was like 275.
Wow,
So that they were bigger,
they definitely were.
whatever it is, 14 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Creeping back up. Thank
Thank
you.
you, Jeff.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, our next item is Richard Mastronati discussing lawn mowing at the Unitarian Church grounds. Okay, sure, okay, great. It's only a single page, okay. Send that down to, there's up one more back up this way, I think. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, and thank you for hearing our request. We appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. We are here to request that the town of Medfield continue to mow a large area of land adjoining the pond in the center of town and Medfield's historic First Meeting House, which is now First Parish Unitarian Universalist of Medfield. The town has been mowing that piece of property for as many years as we can remember, so it's nothing new. First Parish understands that there's a desire, and maybe even a policy, by the town of Medfield not to spend taxpayer money on private property. We understand that. But we believe our situation is somewhat different than other private properties in Medfield. After hearing from us, we expect that you'll appreciate why this is a unique situation and will approve our request. The property, although currently owned by our church, is the site of Medfield's historic First Meeting House and is really the icon of Medfield. A photo of our building and the grounds is used in pretty much every publication, document, and website regarding the town of Medfield. The people in this town clearly identify this property with our town's history and heritage, and it dates back to 1652. The importance of maintaining the property properly is something our congregation takes very seriously and works very hard to achieve. However, we are a small congregation, and we struggle every year to maintain the site of your historic meeting house. We believe that we've been very generous to the town of Medfield by making our land open to the public. It is freely and frequently used by residents of Medfield. They walk dogs there, children play there, people stroll, sit, and enjoy each other's company on our land. We don't think it is in the spirit of Medfield to put any signs that say private property keep out or place any restrictions on its use by the town. It is the center of Medfield and represents an accessible place for gathering and sharing. Also keep in mind that we accept all the liability of the public who use that land without restrictions or cost to the town. We believe that the town has been our partner in honoring Medfield's past by taking care of this piece of land. Although Medfield Day is not a town-sponsored event, you probably have experienced this past Saturday that Memo and the town's residents clearly enjoy the opportunity to gather as a community on our land. They do it each year. It is important to keep this venue looking good and being a positive reflection of Medfield. The town of Medfield has been mowing this large tract of land by the pond for as long as we can remember, and I'm sure this precedent predates most of us here tonight, if not all of us. We are here tonight not to ask for any monies, but rather an extra 20 minutes or so of the town labor when they already have the equipment and the manpower on site to mow the 1/3 sector that is owned by the town. So 1/3 is owned by the town, 2/3 by the church. If the burden falls on us, we have to go out and hire somebody to mow the lawns, and that's money out of our pocket that we simply do not have. Because of these reasons, the fact that we are a unique entity, different from other private properties in Medfield, we urge your support for mowing this as it's done for many years. We're not asking for money, but in-kind support. And just so you know, it takes about 15 minutes now for the town to mow its 1/3. So an extra 15, 20 minutes is all it's required to do that. Any questions?
I guess my question would be first for Christine or whomever, or maybe Kevin.
I think it's gonna be Kevin.
For Kevin, obviously there's been a proposed change in what's happened here. So do you want to explain the change? I think I understand it, but why don't you explain? And please use the microphone.
We've actually, as far as I've been here, we've never mowed it. We've only mowed the 1/3 area of property that is town land. So who is mowing it outside of us? It's not Park and Rec. So we've maintained the 1/3 parcel, but we have not mowed the full lot there.
Okay, maybe Christine?
Let me get back to you on that.
Okay, so we're not sure who's been mowing the lawn.
Well, it hasn't been us.
Right. Well, maybe it hasn't been us either.
And we are of the understanding it has been the town.
So as far as you know, the lawn gets mowed. Kevin doesn't think he's doing it.
Right.
I don't think we're doing
I
it.
don't think we're doing it. Anybody here been mowing the lawn at the UU church?
And would you mind weeding at the police station?
Do you don't know who does them? Like, if you know it's stopped, do you know who it is that stopped doing it?
We believe it's the town. We don't know specifically what department in the town.
It appears
But this
it's
has been
not.
going on for, I don't know how many years, 20 years?
But
more?
when did it stop?
When did it stop this
When
year?
did you notice the grass was longer?
This year.
Well, when the town stopped mowing it.
But when was that?
That was in, I'd say, the April, May timeframe.
And the other
And
the other
our-
portion of it's been continued to be mowed?
Yes. And it's not quite 1/3, it's less, but we're not picking on this. But one of our board members met with, I don't know if it was you or somebody else, and said, what's going on? Because we have been having it mowed all these years. And I think you told him that we're no longer doing this. So that's when I met with Christine and said,
Right, I was under the impression that Park and Rec had stopped mowing it. I didn't realize we didn't know exactly who was mowing it.
right.
You were told that Park and Rec is no longer, this is kind of important when we
I
have.
wasn't part of the conversation, so I can only say that Park and Recreation, who is now mowing it, wasn't gonna mow our 2/3.
You know, the issue here is we have a dispute over, there's
I'd have
a
to double
fairy
check my
godmother
notes
who's
on
been,
this. I'd have to double check my notes on this.
okay.
'cause
I mean, it seems like you're the most likely candidate. If Park and Rec has been mowing that other
like I
portion
would
of
be the
it,
most likely
it
candidate to stop
seems,
it.
you know, that, so.
Mark, can I ask, so there's one issue that you're making is like, we've been doing it since 1652 or whenever they first started having lawns. There's probably some merit to that argument if that's the case, and we need to run that to ground. But Mark, could you comment, the legal issue around the town maintaining private property, recognizing that back in 1652, when it was a town meeting place, the legal structures where churches in towns and the town governments, there was a much closer alliance that didn't appear to violate the laws the way it now appears to violate the laws. Mark, can you just comment on what the guardrails are around even our option of doing that?
It's not merely that it's private property, it's because it's religiously owned property that it's an issue. It's a First Amendment issue. So you can't give preferential treatment to religious institutions and their property, nor can you discriminate against them. It has to be a neutral approach. So if you're not mowing any other private property around town, all other things being equal, you would not be allowed to do theirs either. That being said, you could have some quid pro quo whereby there were benefits being obtained by the community that would justify a particular treatment. And a lot of that's laid out in this letter in terms of the access, the fact that it's indistinguishable from town property, that the pond is owned by the town, that to get access to the pond, you need to traverse this property. So there is in my opinion, there's more flexibility here than there might be in the paradigm case that arose when I first became town council, when municipalities were snow plowing church parking lots, and the ACLU got involved. So I think this is very easily distinguishable from that situation.
And Christine, I know there's an ongoing discussion as one of your goals for the year is to resolve the responsibility for mowing and maintaining various town properties. And so putting aside the Unitarian piece of it for a second, is this portion of Meeting House Pond kind of within the ambit of that evaluation?
The 1/3 piece of it.
That 1/3 piece of it would be a part of it,
I did
so.
just talk to two people at DPW, and they have not been mowing.
Okay.
They were under the impression it was Park and Rec.
All right. Well, I think here's what I would suggest. I mean, as we sort out this general issue of who's going to be doing this at the various parks, I think to Mark's point, I don't think this is. I'd be surprised if someone charged thousands of dollars to mow for 20 minutes. But if someone doesn't do that, I'll be happy to mow it for thousands of dollars. I'm within walking distance of the
It's
hotel.
$150. It's $150, $125 a shot.
So, I think I think the actual value of that would probably be lower if it were folded into to however the town is dealing with the section of it. But I think we have to sort out this bigger issue of what we're doing with our downtown properties that Parks and Rec does not want to maintain anymore. I don't have an objection to it if Mark can sort out the legalities on continuing this, but it's part of a bigger discussion about what's going to be happening with all of those various Park
I would
Lake,
say if you're inclined to do it,
locales.
that there ought to be, by analogy to what we've done with
Brothers Market.
Brothers, is to have basically a memorandum of understanding that in return for public access, et cetera, that the town will undertake certain obligations. That would be the template.
We'd be open to that.
So I think if we can work out an accommodation that it makes sense for the town to do the little bit of extra that's being requested. So I guess I would support that. My question to you is, since this was the town's original meeting site, when did you guys take it away from us?
Nobody took it away from you. It's been in the hands of many different entities over the years.
Mel,
Question, is the church compensated by memo for use during Medfield Day?
A small amount, token amount. But if you see it afterwards and it's all trampled and, you know, all the, it hardly compensates, but it's at least a token, it's a gift on the part of Memo.
For what it's worth, and I think some people that are here for other issues today, we're a community not just because we have a town government that does stuff. We're a community because we have a town government that does things, but we also have other organizations in the community that do things. And one of those elements, I think, are the churches in the community. I happened to get into a conversation around this with someone just yesterday, and we were kind of mutually lamenting the decline of the significance of the non-governmental organizations in our community. I came in here thinking I was going to be against this on legal grounds, so I didn't start, when you got up, I wasn't thinking I was going to be sympathetic to your argument, but particularly if we can run to ground what the story is about how the magic grass has been disappearing for centuries or however long. My own view on this is that this is a case where your church is providing something that the town has used for a long time that has significant public benefit. But, you know, plowing your parking lot so people could get to the church on Sunday, I understand how that doesn't make any sense at all.
Right.
I now understand how this could make sense for us to try to do it. In the burden, if we can figure out who's going to do it, sounds like it's not like an extreme burden. We still have to get our act together on who's responsible for what, and that's just a broader thing. But
Sure.
I do think, as a town, we need to fight some of the trends where, I don't know if it's cynical or skeptical or what it is, but some of the trends where we break the bonds that we've had over the years. And I think this is one place I would choose not to automatically break the bond. So
I too thought that we were going to be coming in here tonight and being told by our town council that this was absolutely impermissible and that I thought you were going to lose the mowing that you were already getting, in addition to not getting the additional mowing that you're asking for. So I'm pleased that town council attorneys are always accused of standing in the way of deals, and this time the attorney's allowing us to make the deal. So
I never said that. I never said that. Just on record.
So for purposes of this issue, although we certainly are curious to know the mystery cutter who's been doing this for so long, and we ought to figure that piece out.
Kevin and I will talk about that in the morning.
Are we in a position to basically endorse the idea that the town, you may have to give us a little time to get our act together, but are we in a
Can't
position?
guarantee the weeding. Mowing,
Yeah.
yes. Weeding,
Yeah.
we're not so good at.
Recognizing we'd want to work something out that makes it clear it's appropriate.
Now, for the record, the fact is the unique layout of the land, that there is actually 1/3 of this area that's owned by the town, but for all appearances, it appears to be a town park. The town pond is owned by the town. You need to access across their property to reach the pond. They've agreed not to restrict the public, to allow public access, in fact, in public recreating. So in return for that, the town would be entitled, in my opinion, to do minimal commitment of maintaining the lawn.
Great. Have a motion to,
so moved.
Second.
all those in favor?
Thank you.
All right.
Why don't you take a moment to introduce Reverend David Egan?
Now they bring the heavy guns in.
Welcome.
Have you been mowing the grass?
He is now.
It was I've been mowing the grass. No, I do appreciate, Selectmen, the opportunity to introduce myself. My name's Reverend Dave Egan, the 39th settled minister at First Parish UU. And just to sort of back up what we've been talking about, you know, I've been on the job for about a month. And when I sit in my office and I look out the window and there's children playing Frisbee and, you know, people walking through the park, it's really a beautiful meeting place. It's a place that I think adds a lot to the town. Being here for Medfield Day, you know, I was just blown away that a town of this size can have so many people. It seemed like half of the state of Massachusetts was here. So I really appreciate this time to just say hello and thank you and welcome, you know, for welcoming me here. And I'll tell you, driving in from Quincy, I really appreciate the little bit of traffic you have, and it's just a really wonderful community. So thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome to Medfield.
Thank you.
You may find some people in town that debate you about the little bit of traffic, but,
Compared to Quincy.
okay. Great, thank you. Let's see, the next item we have is Medfield Youth Outreach. How do we want to, there we go. Hi, Chelsea.
Thank you for taking the time again to discuss youth outreach and the various programs we offer to residents. For those, obviously, for those of you who were here, you know that we were back here in June to discuss the hiring of a new director after Dawn Elcott vacated her position at the end of April. And some questions were raised and some concerns about some of the services we offer were raised. And so, again, I thank you for taking the time to offer me the opportunity to try to answer some outstanding questions that you may have. I know at the end of the June meeting, there was a request to provide a visual diagram of some of the services that the Youth Outreach Department provides and how that relates to other town departments. So that was provided over the summer in an electronic format. I have that also now in paper format if you'd like, along with some other accompanying documents that might be useful over the course of this conversation.
Thank you.
So again, if you had time to review this diagram, you can kind of see how this department kind of works with a whole variety of both town departments and also some of those non-governmental organizations that you mentioned before and how we kind of interconnect to support residents. So I'm happy to answer questions. I know Selectman Murby, you had submitted some questions just prior to the weekend. I'm happy to try to do my best to answer those and any outstanding issues that are left.
Before we start, just by way of review, I think, and I'll stand to be corrected by either Pete or Mike if their recollection doesn't match mine. In June, when we had the meeting, I think that one of the issues that certainly snagged me was the issue of provision of clinical services as opposed to youth outreach being a referral agency, sending people. For me, the model there is more along the lines of referrals to Riverside. So the question is youth outreach a referral agency or is youth outreach a clinical service? In June, the issue of whether we were going, there was some concern because of what happened going into this fiscal year with your budget, with Dawn having left, that there was a move afoot to, one way or the other, squelch, reduce, eliminate youth outreach. We confirmed at the meeting in June that we were planning to replace the director. So that issue, as far as I believe all three of us are concerned, is not an issue that's on the table. The subsequent discussions that we've had, though, were around what the job description for that director would be in light of what the role of youth outreach is. So just in terms of where we're at on that, and you've seen my questions, so I'll get into my questions later, but I just want to make sure, given the interest in this issue, that people here in the room understand what is up for debate and what's not up for debate. And the issue of whether youth outreach has an important role to play, whether there's an intention to replace the director, that's not up for debate. And then Christine, I think can you give us an update on the personnel board action?
Sure. So the personnel board met last night, and I had made a recommendation to them, regardless of whether or not you change the direction of clinical consulting, the personnel board has decided to move it from a grade 2 to a grade 4. And they took their vote and they've done that as of last night. So once the decision is made to finalize the job description, we can advertise the position.
Does that solve the issue that the youth outreach was raising about the degree requirements?
It's not
versus
just the degree requirements, it's the amount of service that you need to be in the position. And in looking at the other positions that are in a grade 4, the director of youth outreach fits much more appropriately in a grade 4 than a grade 2.
So I guess, I don't understand the grades. I don't know what the grades
Oh,
mean.
I'm sorry, we're increasing the salary range of the position.
It's under the
Yep.
personnel plan, going from
Yep.
grade 2 to grade 4 under the personnel plan.
Yeah, okay. So it basically satisfies what they were asking for then, it sounds like.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
We can open up to, are we okay? I was gonna ask the same question. Okay, okay. And there,
I can't believe everyone doesn't read the big personnel plan. We vote in the middle of the warrant every year. It's amazing.
so I'm not sure whether I'm not going to be the main driver of this debate, so I'm going to suggest that I'll let both Mike and Pete may raise any questions they want. Molly Frankel got, and you got a copy, and Christine got a copy of what my issues were, so it was actually a good question to ask me to put that down on paper, because it forced me to organize my own thinking, which was helpful. But I'll defer to the two of you first before.
Yeah, I had sent questions to Molly as well, and I don't know to the extent there's any overlap. We could cover them together. I think they may not be as substantive as yours, it sounds, Gus. So I'm happy to go through them. Did Molly forward those to you as well? This was a couple of weeks ago.
I got your questions. I don't know if I saw your questions, but I'm happy to. I think I was under the impression that some of the questions you both had raised were regarding liability insurance and HIPAA compliance. And so some of actually the documents I provided for you just now are the forms that we use with any of our clinical clients before starting treatment in regards to informed consent that a parent or guardian need to sign, as well as an authorization form for release of information. If we are to talk to anyone other than the client and their direct guardian, they need to be able to sign a form giving us permission to talk to school staff, other healthcare providers, anyone. So those are our, as well as a notice of informed consent under the HIPAA omnibus rule. I don't know the numbers. Those are all of our forms that are fairly standard for mental health practices to ensure HIPAA compliance.
Great.
As well as to the insurance issue, Christine, I know we were talking to get some verification that the town's insurance policy does in fact cover the provision of clinical services for town employees.
And that is true. You are covered under, we have $1 million liability insurance policy for all of our employees, and that covers Chelsea and any other person that works in the department.
Plus Chelsea and Dawn both carried their own insurance policies as well.
Correct. But that's what they do on their own. I'm only concerned about the liability for the town. In speaking with our insurance agency, the caveat to that is they must remain under the auspices of the Board of Health because they actually fall under the Board of Health therapist insurance.
Okay. So that is a
question then, where we fall, yeah.
So as a follow-up to that, I think I would like to see, we've obviously made a number of new appointments to the Board of Health, some formalization of what that oversight looks like and how the Board of Health exercises its oversight duties. I think there's been some disagreement, or I don't want to characterize it incorrectly. I think there's been some question from the Board of Health or previous members of the Board of Health exactly what their role is with respect to the oversight of Medfield Youth Outreach. If it's required for our insurance, I think we've got to spell out what that oversight's going to look like. There ought to be a regular schedule of whatever reviews need to take place. One of the questions I had is we are rolling out now over the course of this year, performance reviews by the town administrator of town department heads. And so my question was how, if at all, would the clinical piece of the Medfield Youth Outreach work fall into those reviews? I would think there would be privacy and compliance issues around getting into that at all. And I understand that there's a state regulatory body for regulating social workers, but I think as we spell that out in the review that Christine will conduct of the to-be-hired director of Medfield Youth Outreach, we ought to have a clear delineation of exactly what Christine is reviewing the director for and what she's not. And it seems to me that she should not be reviewing the clinical aspect of what the director is doing, and that will fall under the regular state regime. But I want to make sure that's spelled out in that process. Yeah. And then the other two questions I had, I'm just trying to go back to one of them was about, we'd raised this issue of the name.
Yes.
Of the name as to whether it ought to be renamed something like Medfield Youth and Family Services or something other than just Medfield Youth Outreach. And then the second question was about the advisory board.
Sure.
and whether the advisory board ought to, what exactly the mission of the advisory board is going to be, and whether it should remain a Board of Selectmen appointed town committee, in which case I'd like to see its mandate both be the support and advice to the director, but also advice to the Board of Selectmen and helping on that front as well. Or if the preference is just to be a sounding board and an advocate for the director, it's probably better if it's not a Board of Selectmen appointed committee. So that was my other question. Otherwise, the insurance, and HIPAA, in terms of record storage
So
under HIPAA.
all records are in paper format, and
Yeah.
they're all kept in locked file cabinets in a locked closet in our locked office.
Okay.
So the only other people who have access to keys are custodians, and because we rent space from the school resource officer. I locked myself out of my office yesterday, and I was very grateful to have the school resource officer be able to let me back in. But all records are kept under lock and key at all times.
Okay.
Our office automatically locks behind us when we leave.
Okay. And in terms of just sort of staying up with the HIPAA regulations and whatnot, is that something that you and the director do just as a matter of professional responsibility, or is there some town, I mean, Mark or Christine, does the town have a general policy in that area? How does that work? Like, who makes sure we're current?
Sure. So I can speak from the social work standpoint. As a licensed clinical social worker, I would lose my license if I violated HIPAA. I'm responsible for the National Association of Social Workers Code of Ethics, so uphold that code of ethics, and that does include maintaining confidentiality at all times, except in the case of danger to the client or others. So, and that's spelled out in our informed consent form that all parents and guardians must sign, or if you're 18 or older, all clients must read and sign before starting treatment. So,
Chelsea, I'm going to challenge, not respectfully, and it's a question that I have, a concern I have around HIPAA, and I am not totally knowledgeable about HIPAA, so I'm not coming from a standpoint of knowledge. I only know what I've heard about HIPAA. HIPAA is not just a matter of abiding by an association's confidentiality rules. There's issues around HIPAA around how records are transmitted. There's issues around how they're safe, how the record itself is safeguarded, how it's encrypted. There's liability to the town if those records are violated. And then there's issues around what information is even shared outside of what would effectively be the two of you with the board, with the schools. There's issues around annual training in HIPAA compliance.
yes, exactly.
Who checks, where's the source of the true expertise on HIPAA requirements that you're relying on?
So I can speak for myself in terms of the forms that I've been using the past 4 years I've been in my position are the forms that were there when I started my job. I, again, can only speak from the social work standpoint in terms of HIPAA compliance, but that authorization for release of information covers that speaking to anybody else about a client without the client's permission. So even reporting to our advisory board, we de-identify any client information. We don't share names or even details about a client. We will completely de-identify anything. So it truly is only myself and the director who have knowledge of client information, and that is with the informed consent of clients entering treatment. So again, you mentioned the schools. We're separate from the schools. We collaborate very closely with them, but in order to share client information and details, we need a signed release from a parent or guardian in order to do that. So if a school makes a referral to our office, they will give the information to the parent or guardian, and it's that person's job to reach out to us to request treatment.
How do you talk to, do you coordinate with PCPs or, I mean, is there anyone else that routinely knows what you're doing?
With a signed release, we will coordinate with PCPs. Again, it's
How do you
complete-
transmit the records?
Typically it's phone consultations, to be honest.
Okay.
We can transmit records, but most of the time, by and large, it's over the phone where we're discussing treatment, we're discussing any diagnoses, things like that. And that's in the interest of confidentiality.
And if it's not over the phone, how do you transmit records?
We have scanned, we have faxed, we have mailed. But again, that's rare. Most of the time, I would say 90% of the time, it's over the phone.
So I'm over my head on the details of HIPAA, but my knowledge that I what knowledge I have suggests that doesn't meet HIPAA requirements. So the broad issue is if we're doing this, we need to be absolutely sure we're complying with HIPAA.
And I agree, and I take that very seriously in my job, and I'm always happy to get more consultation around HIPAA. I would love to sit down and review all of our forms. I'm very open to updating all of our forms to be the most up-to-date and the most responsible they
Okay.
can be, so.
So,
But again-
so I'll just put that on the table, that if we proceed with these clinical services, that for me is an open issue to make sure that we actually are, because that's a liability. If we screw it up, it's a liability for the town, it's not just a liability for the department.
I agree. I mean, and one example of that is we don't actually have a working fax machine in my office, so anytime I need to send a fax, I come to the town hall. When people have asked to fax something to me, I say no, because it would be sent to just the main fax machine in town hall, and I know that's not confidential, it's not a safe space, so I don't even allow faxes to be received on my end.
My understanding of that is that electronic transmission of records should be encrypted. So that's, I may be wrong, but that's just to give you a sense of where I'm coming from. That's
No,
my
I
understanding.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
I think you're right on that, Gus. I think that, that mailing, however, is HIPAA compliant. I mean, the issue is that email and faxes are just not
Right.
secure.
So, I'm not trying to slam you, Chelsea, I'm just
No, I-
saying,
I
if
enjoy
we
these
go down this
conversations 'cause
path,
I take
we
it
need to,
seriously.
the liability
But
was a big issue.
But any emailed record can be encrypted. I mean, you can encrypt any PDF that you're mailing out and then send the password separately.
Yeah, I don't, so my question, so I don't think we have an encryption protocol right now, though.
And I'd be welcome to,
Yeah.
and open to discussing that, for sure.
You just need to get a copy of Adobe Acrobat, and then you can encrypt it, password protect it.
I have a feeling HIPAA's a little more than just something you might buy on your own, but I don't know. You may be right, Pete, I don't know.
To your point, though, the vast majority of any consultation that we engage in with PCPs, with school providers, are over the phone, or in the case of schools, sometimes in person, in order to protect confidentiality.
And you're, sounds like you're disciplined about getting the permission to do that from the parents?
Yes.
Okay.
Very. I would lose my license if I violated that.
You've got your questions answered? Do you
Some
have-
of them, yeah.
Yeah,
I have asked them. I'll wait and answer.
okay. Do you have any questions or comments?
I didn't have any questions, but I did have a comment, which is that my understanding is that the youth outreach has been doing the clinical services for 41 years now. My experience with Medfield Youth Outreach really comes from having served on the Medfield Cares About Protection group for a number of years, and having watched the youth outreach workers participate in running a town effort through that, and then more recently with the Medfield Coalition for Suicide Prevention, and seeing the leadership of the youth outreach worker and director to mobilize the town to move forward. And they've been very entrepreneurial, very effective, I think, in terms of those efforts. And I think they've added a huge amount to the town as a result of that. I think from everything that I hear about the clinical services, it's an area, a niche that is really needed in town. We have kids who are in need and are not going to get served at the schools. A lot of them prefer not to get served at the schools. And there are people in town that really need this service. And I think that unfortunately there's been this almost 6 months gap in having two of the providers, and so that the town hasn't been providing the same service for the past half year almost. So I think that's unfortunate because that hurts a series of families. So that's it.
So let me pick up on from where you are. I'll throw my stuff out, and then we can circle back around. The issue, as I said, is not an issue of do we want youth outreach, do we need youth outreach, or we may rename it to suggest a different, or broader focus, but that's not the issue. So the points that you're bringing about the MCSP and other things like that, I'm looking at it saying there's two people, and I had always assumed youth outreach was a referral service, and quite frankly, because you've got two people and you have people with complex issues, and my exposure to it was really through the College James what's the first name?
Interface referral service.
William James, I couldn't think of his first name, with that, the interface, and with Riverside. So the idea, and in past experiences, I've had a picture of what a social worker does, which is an integrator who more than anyone else helping someone out sees the full picture and sees the person and knows how to do that full spectrum, I'll call it strategic navigation. So with 2 people in youth outreach, I'm saying, okay, that's a huge job. And then there's this thing appended to it that's clinical services for certain people. So my issue isn't, are you adding value? My issue is there's these 2 things that need to go on, and if anything, I've got a strategic concern that this, as stated, is focused on 18-year-olds and younger and their families. And I'm looking at some of the most devastating events that have occurred in this town concerning people, and they're not in the schools. Many of them are just a little bit out of the schools where they're young adults or they're college age. Some have hit home personally, some just broadly have, and that's what leads me to the question, are we actually, as recently as last month, where someone appears to have done something that they wouldn't have fit into any of the categories in these circles because they're maybe early 50s. And I'm asking the question. It's not really, I don't have the answer, but I'm asking the question that says, as a town, are we actually taking a look at where the demographics of this town are going? Are we keeping up with the issues that we're facing? And are we actually recognizing the full spectrum of what our social service needs are and thinking about it and figuring out how to address it? Or is everybody in their silos with their piece of it, but nobody's actually navigating the whole thing? That's the strategic question that you saw that I led off with.
And I appreciate that point, and if I may.
Sure, please.
I think the name Medfield Youth Outreach is misleading. I think it comes from decades ago where there was an outreach worker who actually did street outreach, and it's since evolved, obviously, to meet the evolving needs of the town. And so I completely agree with you that the name can be very misleading, and many other youth and family services departments in other towns who do offer clinical services as well as information and referrals are called just that, youth and family services. And I think that does truly represent what we do. While our primary clinical focus is children 0 to 18 and their families, we are not strict in that focus, because we do understand that people of all ages need mental health care and can't always access it. And so I think those who know our program understand that they can come to us no matter what their age and no matter whether or not they're a parent or part of a family with young children. But I agree that for residents who are not familiar with our program, they might not think to come to Medfield Youth Outreach, even though we would very much welcome them in the door to help them with a variety of needs. So I'm very open, I know, to changing the name to be fully representative of the scope of services we offer. I think Don Alcott, the former director, had brought that up in the past, and so I appreciate that point, because I think that would show residents in town who don't already know about our program that they are welcome and they can access services.
So I think that's one point that, at least, I'm not sure if we have unanimous concurrence.
Oh, I
but
agree, the
yeah.
name should get changed.
I think that's an easy piece of the issue, and there is a piece of that says that town needs to know that. Now, there's another issue that says who are the people that are qualified to help advise us on what those trends are, so that we're thinking about it. But I think we got at least a step in the right direction on at least getting the identity straight.
Sure, advise us on what trends, what do you?
We're building affordable housing in town. Some of those people moving in don't necessarily have kids. Given that it's affordable housing, my guess is that some of them have greater financial difficulties than others.
Yeah, which is always a stressor.
I listen, I read some of the posts on Concerned Citizens, and it's clear to me there's some people who are not necessarily parents of kids that are in the school system that probably could use a little bit of help. And a piece of that has to do, I didn't mean it in that way. And that ties into the comment I made earlier about the conversation I had yesterday and the comment I made here. It's not just the town, it's the clergy, it's other organizations in town. And my biggest issue when I asked you to do this was, am I seeing a bunch of silos
Right.
Or am I actually seeing people that are serving particular, communities, but with some overarching unifying force and beyond just who's in the town departments, who's in the town to where, and I know some of this happens, so I'm aware that this happens, but that's where I was coming from, is I've heard too many anecdotal stories about people staying in their lanes or telling others to stay in their lanes. I'm trying to break that down.
And I appreciate that, and I think, again, that the name is misleading because that kind of grassroots collaboration happens every day. I mean, within the past week, I've worked with Lisa Donovan at the Council on Aging to support specific residents who do fall within the ages of 18 and 55, who don't technically meet the requirements of either of our departments, yet we have the resources and the clinical expertise or the social expertise to be able to help those residents. And so I work with members of the police department, again, to help with adults who might not fall, within the youth range or with the older adults range, to help adults with mental health needs get the services they deserve and that they need. And so I think those kinds of grassroots collaboration, I know those kinds of grassroots collaborations happen daily and have happened since the beginning of this department.
So my impression is that for one thing, the challenges around that may be growing, and my subjective impression is that we haven't done as good a job of that in the past as we probably should. And so going forward, I'd like us to get better at that along the way. Let me switch to the clinical.
Before you just leave that, Gus, could I just, that's one of the areas that I have suggested in the past, that maybe the town could be better integrated in the services that it
Right.
provides.
Right.
And that I'm hoping that maybe Christine will think that it's important enough to bring together the human service providers in town, and I would include the veteran service agent, the
People on this chart.
outreach coordinator at the Council on Aging. I would also include the police and fire, because they're the people that interact with a lot of these people that are in need on a regular basis. There's an ambulance call, and so that they get to know them. Chief Meany always talked about knowing the kids that went to bed hungry in town.
So I understand somewhere in the 80s, there was an advisory committee that had membership in it that actually was a lot like what you're calling out. And the story I got was, some point that committee just stopped meeting and it went away. So as I'm looking at youth outreach or youth and family services, I don't know that this is the department that is that integrating agent, or whether it's just another one of the circles on the chart and we still need some sort of a body that integrates all these needs.
So Gus, one of the things that I can tell you from going to the Suicide Coalition meetings is that is one of those melding pots where the schools are there, the police are there, the religious institutions are there. It is one of those efforts where the town has come together in the way that you're talking about.
And I think it's under the catalyst of youth outreach, right?
Yeah, they
We
started
coordinate it. We coordinate the coalition, but it's made up of 12 sectors across the community: parents, faith-based,
Right.
youth.
So what I'm getting at, and I'm not staking a position here, I'm trying to figure it out. I'm sitting here looking at how, the role you have played in things like that, and I'm saying, and then there's this town need. And I don't know if this department is the department that ultimately becomes the department to help with that broader spectrum town need, or whether this is a department that kind of stays within some well-bounded lanes and we have some other issue of how do we actually, who takes responsibility for that. It may just be it may be an appointed board. I don't think it's the board that we're talking about here in the role that they're playing here, but it may be that there's an appointed advisory board that's a town, Medfield Social Services Advisory Board that gives us the kind of insight that we need to figure out. And it may be that may be the board that we actually want to solve that issue. I don't have an answer on this. I'm wrestling with it, but in the context of this, I'm trying to say, well, is this the path, or is this actually not the path, and there's some other path?
Well,
Yeah,
go ahead.
get the microphone there.
Hi, I'm Kathy Thompson, school nurse leader. I went to a meeting last spring in Needham that did just that. They had a community assessment done, and I think it was like $20,000 or some big amount of money. It was like a 200-page binder. I mean, I only went there to ask money from the president of the hospital for our interface program, which we did get. But I was really impressed by that's exactly what they did with this community assessment. They went to each person that, you know, Chelsea has on that diagram and found out exactly what piece they took care of, and then they had an action plan at the end for what needed to be done to coordinate all that, and one of them was an advisory board, is what they recommended. You know, I wonder, you know, is a community assessment something that we should be considering doing?
So yeah, I mean, that's where my head is at. I have the questions, I don't have the answers yet, but I want to put that on the table because it does affect why I'm saying what I'm saying and why I'm pushing on what I'm pushing at relative to this one transaction of hiring a new director. And that's where that piece. Let me switch to the clinical services issue.
Sure.
So the first, I didn't realize that there was a whole lot going on. I'm still not quite sure on the balance, and I do have some interest in hearing where the trends in that type of service have gone. To Pete's point, I think, Christine, when we talked, was that 1982 annual report you were looking at? 1982 annual report mentioned some long-term clinical services. So I will recognize that I don't know if 40 years ago we were doing it, but 30 years ago, 30 plus years ago, apparently we were doing that. I would say that the issue of mental health care in 1980 compared to how it's looked at today, we may have a long way to go yet, but compared to what was going on back there, I suspect it was fairly inconsequential, and certainly pre-HIPAA was a lot less risky from a liability standpoint. So that's where the liability questions came from. I think we've got an answer on the town. The malpractice liability we have an answer to. The HIPAA compliance, I'm not convinced we have an answer to, but it sounds to me like maybe we all have to be sure we've got that. It's not that we couldn't get there, it's just that we need to know what it is. The third piece of it, for me, is to better understand if in fact we are going to provide clinical services, what I would like to understand is what clinical services are we providing versus things that we're referring.
Sure.
And it's not an answer, you know, I don't have an answer what it needs to be, but I would like some precision to understand what kind of clinical services do we look at providing internal to the town versus the clinical services that we refer. And I understand we may refer some things for a capacity reason that we may still refer, but I'd kind of like to know what are the clinical services we actually are providing. The second piece of that, and this came from a conversation I had with someone that it caused me to pay more attention to this. My first reaction when I had the conversation was, well, refer them to clinics. And the answer I got to that was, well, if you don't have private health insurance, the clinics won't take patients that don't have private health care because they're not going to get the kind of reimbursement that they want to get through private health insurance. So it's like, okay, I get that. And then I said, well, but how about Mass Health? And then it's like, well, those clinics won't take Mass Health because it's not there. It's like, well, okay, do we take Mass Health? And there were two reasons I was asking that. One was the financial question, and the second is I'm assuming that there's some degree of certification that is required in order to qualify for Mass Health. So there's a quality question. This is not a personal slam on anybody here, but the issue of who actually reviews the clinical operation we're running and confirms that it complies with standards, that it meets quality standards, who comes in on an annual basis and actually does all that? If anyone, I don't think anyone does it now, but
So as a licensed clinical social worker,
Yep.
we need to actually register with Mass Health as a non-participating provider. So
Okay.
there's a form that we fill out when we renew our license every 2 years that we submit to Mass Health that says, you know, yes, we meet the requirements for Mass Health, but we are in an agency that doesn't actually bill insurance. And so there are forms that we're required to submit every 2 years by the state to Mass Health that qualifies us as a non-participating provider.
so why don't we say we're a participating provider?
because we're not currently billing any insurance.
Why don't we?
Well,
If we're-
as we talked about in June, that is an option. I think Needham, actually, the town of Needham and their Youth and Family Services Department did a needs-based assessment to weigh the cost benefits. They did a cost benefit analysis of billing insurance and what that would look like and how much money they would get back. And I can't speak for Medfield, but for Needham, they determined that the cost of billing insurance would require a billing specialist to be hired, possibly on a part-time basis. And any reimbursement rates, any reimbursement costs that were garnered from that would not offset the costs of training and hiring and paying the salary.
So that screams to me for a regional solution among towns, because what we're saying is each town individually can't afford the billing provider, therefore we don't bill. And here's my problem. The default answer then is whatever clinical services we provide, the taxpayers are paying for it. We are providing free healthcare services, and this is why I want the definition. If we are going to provide town-provided, free, taxpayer-funded healthcare services, I want a definition around what those healthcare services are, and I want a definition of who's eligible to take advantage of them.
So I can say, oh,
Okay.
sorry. Go
Well, where my conversation went after we talked about that and about Mass Health is I said, then have people self-pay. And to be clear here, I'm not going after people who can't afford this service. I'm saying then have them just self-pay. And the answer I got in this particular conversation was, well, they wouldn't want to do that. And my answer to that is, well, if the people benefiting from this are not willing to pay for it, why are we assuming the taxpayers should be willing to pay for it? I'm not talking about people who are financially in a position where they can't pay for it, but I don't think those are the only, if those are the only people we're serving, that's fine, but I don't think it is.
I mean, the answer to that question when this came up, and I'd asked this specific question in June, was that while we don't collect specific financial information, that most of the people benefiting from it would not be able to afford to pay. And that's as I recall the answer to that question when we met in June.
I'm
Now,
saying,
again,
why are the taxpayers paying for anybody who can afford to pay for the service?
Well, I mean, you can say that about anything, right? I mean, people can afford to pay for school, too, and the taxpayers pay for the school, so.
Well, that's a little different. That's a recognized thing that local communities fund.
Well, so is this, apparently.
No, I'm
You know, at least
suggesting
Needham
that
does.
it's not.
Okay.
I mean, or if it is, it's been because it's been invisible to everybody. You see where I'm coming from? Is you don't. So let me try this again. My question is, what free health care are we providing to who at taxpayer expense?
So somebody actually raised this point. I've been speaking to other youth and family services departments in other communities to understand their model, how they comply with HIPAA, how they deal with insurance, just to be able to get some context. And somebody in Westwood actually kind of drew this analogy of mental health care is health care, and towns do provide other sources of health care in terms of flu clinics, public health nurse visits that do cost the taxpayers money, but it's preventative in order to protect the overall well-being of the community. And so there is an analogy there in terms of providing health care to those who can't otherwise afford it or otherwise access it for the overall well-being of the community. I do see mental health care, especially with young people, as prevention that can save taxpayers money overall in the long run in terms of hospital visits, police involvement, ambulance rides.
So I would need a clear definition. I mean, you could use that argument to justify whatever you want to justify in the area of healthcare. So what I'm asking for is a clear definition of what we're putting in that bucket, who's eligible for it, and I would like clarity. If taxpayers say we don't have a problem with that, then I don't have a problem with that. Yes, sure.
Melanie Vagnini, 6 Snyder Road. So we voted on this budget, right? In the town meeting, we talked about somebody leaving, right? And that was asked, and it was explained that this person would be replaced, right? And we all voted, and everybody was voting for this. We've had this for 30 to 40 years, right? We've had clinical services. We've had this. We've been paying for it. Nobody has minded paying for it. It's not a lot of money compared to other things. It's a lifeline. It is a lifeline for the youth. You say, we talked in June, you talked about clergy. Not everybody has it, not everybody wants it. Separation of church and state, right? Talked about schools. If you need to get help from the schools, you need to show a disability. To get special needs services, you need to show a disability. You need to show that it, not to go to the nurse, of course, and things like that, but to get real, special needs services, you need to show a disability. You need to show that it is getting in the way of your education, that you cannot be properly educated because you specifically have a disability. I have been in IEP meetings where the school people have been extremely helpful, seeing a need, filling that need. I have also been in IEP meetings where the budget is more of a concern than the student, and where you're fighting with the school to get the services that a child desperately needs. And it takes a long time. You could ask for help at the beginning of the school year and get an IEP in May. So
what I can say, speaking personally, is that's a change from where Medfield was 10 years ago.
I would say it's probably not. But in any case, if you have a kid that is, if you're having trouble, you can call Medfield Youth Outreach and you can say, this is what's going on with my kid. And they don't have to, do a bunch of things to first figure out whether they can even talk to you. So, but in any case, this is a service that we've had for 40 years.
I've been here for 24 of those years,
Right.
and what I'm telling you is I didn't understand this was a service we had. So I don't think you can say we had it, you didn't know about it, but you endorsed it. My point, and I know I'm coming across like an aggressive guy here, but what I'm saying is this is a free healthcare service that I just discovered we actually provide. You're making the argument, well, but there's only 2 people in the department. It's a small, that was the argument made in June. And I said, are you saying there is no intention to ever grow this department? And I got a no. No, we're not saying that.
No intention to what? Sorry?
I said, if you're saying, well, it's only 2 people and it's a salary and we're paying for it and there's, it's a minor part, I'll buy that as long as the intention here is that that's what the department is going to stay with. But I don't think that's necessarily the case. I don't necessarily even think it should be the case. Because the issues that I'm saying we should be focused on are a broader spectrum than what we've actually historically focused on. It's entirely possible that the needs that we could uncover are going to say, gee, we've got these issues, the town's growing, it could grow over time. The thing I'm looking for is clarity around the healthcare services that we're providing. For free is what I'm most interested in, but I am challenging the question, if we were going to be more expansive, then why aren't we looking for ways to actually generate if we think we're in the best position to provide those clinical services, why not look at actually charging for them? Because then you could go beyond just the minimal, and you could probably build a more serious healthcare organization that had a more vibrant, larger staff.
It sounds like maybe we can't, though, Gus. I mean, if the answer is that it's going to cost more to bill out these services than we're going to collect, or we're not going to be able to collect much in self-pay, I mean,
I'm okay with that if we're saying, and so there'll be 2 people in youth outreach.
Well, but again, I don't quite understand the logic of saying we're going to question doing what we're doing now, because in the future, the department might ask for more, so we're going to do less now. I mean, it just seems to me when they come back and ask for more, they're going to have to go through the same budget process. You couldn't ask any department in this town to say, can you promise me you're never going to want to grow, right? It's an inexorable fact that bureaucracies want to expand themselves. Right. And so if that's the standard, we should just cut everything, because everybody wants to add more, because everybody wants to do more. So I don't understand the
So what
logic of that
trying,
concern.
well, so what I'm trying to get out in front of is a clear, if, maybe you knew that clinical services was being provided all along. I didn't.
I learned it at some point in my life. I can't tell you the exact moment when I came to that realization, but
What I'm getting at is I really don't see what controls are in place for what clinical services are provided, who's eligible for those clinical services, and who is determined to not have to pay for any of those clinical services that are being provided by youth outreach.
So I think that.
And the reason I care is because the default right now is it's too hard, or it might be too expensive for us individually to do this, so we just think the taxpayers should pay for it.
I mean, if you want, if what you want is a study along the lines of what Chelsea has described that Needham did, I'm sure we could figure out how to do that. I think it's unlike, I assume
It's a strategic issue.
Needham's department is bigger than ours, I would guess. And so if they did the analysis and concluded that because they'd have to hire a billing specialist to do this, which doesn't surprise me, that it would not work for them, it wouldn't work for us because they're going to have a higher volume. And so I think the idea of trying to find a way to do this billing regionally sounds like a good idea. I don't know that that's something we can address or resolve tonight. I suspect that when we do hire a director, that the people on the advisory board, it's something they'd be willing to work on. I think it's a good idea if we do it. It would seem to work for a lot of towns. But I don't, as far as the decisions we have to make in the short term, I don't know that we should be looking at the clinical services as a way to sort of, in the old Reaganite term, to starve the beast, right? So we'll get rid of the clinical services because that will somehow reduce the future growth of the department. That doesn't make sense to me. I think the reason why, here's the way I look at it. This has gone on for 40 years, or 39 years, or 37 years. I think, as my questions have shown, I think that I certainly did not have, and I don't think anybody had a full enough grasp of what the regulatory regime was, of how this was organized. I think the questions about HIPAA are real questions, and I think there has to be, not only from it's not just a cold-hearted town financial decision, but when the town is providing services, we should have an interest in making sure those services are being provided legally, being provided well, in compliance with the law. And HIPAA is there to protect the clients, and so we should have an interest in that as well. So I think because it's gone on for 40 years, because they have managed to, without over-bureaucratizing it, right? You could imagine a situation where, like lots of our government programs and the wisdom of our government, you have a million forms you got to fill out. Like I'm looking at this housing lottery form that we have to have for affordable housing. And so, in the grand wisdom of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, we've decided the way to provide affordable housing is by making people fill out like a 60-page form to get into a lottery to figure out, to be deemed worthy of the small number of units that are made available. I think the fact that this is not being done through that kind of bureaucratic intake process and being done in the judgment of the people there is a good thing, not a bad thing. And so I would put this in the category of what you might call a public good. This is a public good. It's not a fee for service. And I think,
So
having
let me ask you a
model,
couple
because we're not in the fee for service business. We're not running a business. As much as we like to pretend like we're turning a profit on this development, we're not running a business, right?
So it's public good. We're not going to charge for it. Do you see any need whatsoever to have any control whatsoever on what services are provided?
Yes. And I think
Where
all
will those controls come from?
of the questions that we've asked have gone to that. If we need to define, right now, I think their clinical social work services is how we define what we're providing, and things that fall within the definition of clinical social work services are what we're
Well, it's
providing.
clinical social work services are very broad.
It is very broad. It is very broad, and I think if
Let me ask him the second question, then we'll go right to you. And then the second, my point is very broad, and you say yes, but as long as it's broadly falls in the category of clinical social work services, you're saying it's good. Is there any control on who's eligible to do it, to take advantage of it?
so, I think they have to have some association with the town of Medfield.
Yes,
Okay.
we only serve Medfield residents.
Right.
So
And-
Medfield is going to provide free clinical health social work services to any resident of Medfield who would like them. That's our standard of
I think
care.
it's- I think
Youth
it's-
and families.
Yeah,
I think
Youth
it's a
and
little.
families? Why only youth and families?
Well, I think that speaks to your broader point and for the misleading name. So our primary clinical counseling base is kids and teenagers 18 and under. However, we have made exceptions in the past, particularly for college-age students who maybe be home for winter break, home for the summer, who aren't going to get connected to a private therapist, who may need services. They may be a former client.
So who will not be allowed to take advantage of this?
Anyone who doesn't live in the town of Medfield who's an adult who will not get weekly clinical counseling. So let me define clinical counseling in the term that I use it when I describe providing clinical counseling to youth. Is typically 1 hour weekly appointments where we meet and we meet them where they're at. You know, we develop a treatment plan based on an assessment that we do as a clinician, and we determine what the best course of action is to help this young person function better in their daily lives. And so for that purpose, for the weekly clinical appointments, that typically is kids and teens. With the exception, we don't ID people when they walk through the door. If there is a young adult who is in need of services on a short-term basis, we have made that exception with the understanding that mental health needs don't stop at the age of 18. They often increase. So I think, again, my clinical training is youth and families. That's what I studied in school. I'm best poised to provide those services. It wouldn't be best practice for me to try to be a counselor for an adult. However, we do provide information and referrals for adults, and we have the capacity to be clinically supportive to adults who walk through our door for needs-based assistance and other things.
So I don't want to drag the discussion out with details here. The point I'm making is I would like to have a clear definition. I think what I heard you say was we will provide clinical services to youth 18 and under. We will refer, if a college or a young adult came in, they would be referred to something. If the parents of a child, they would, I guess, be referred because they're adults.
So for parents, we do parent consultation in terms of supporting the mental health needs of their child.
Only in the context of that.
And supporting them. Of course, anytime you engage in a discussion with any human, I can't take my clinical training out of my brain. And so I am emotionally supportive to parents. I provide parent consultation around supporting the needs of their children. And I often recommend that parents get their own therapist because being a parent is hard work and it's stressful. And I will refer parents to find their own therapist. I can't ethically be both a child's therapist and also their parent's therapist. That's a dual role. So we provide a lot of emotional and social support for people of any age and information and referrals to people of all ages, but specifically weekly client appointments are mainly focused on young people.
So what will help me then will be to have a clear, clearly, this doesn't hang up the director issue. What would help me is to have a clear understanding of what the scope and limits of that clinical service is. And I think you've kind of articulated it, so I think I get it. And then if we are talking youth and family services, and if by family services, what we're really saying is we're extending a service to adults in town, which would be through referral, services are both the clinical and the referrals. If we're extending the services to adults in town, regardless of whether they have 18-year-olds and younger, I'd just like that clear in the scope. If we're not saying that, I'd like that clear, because then I think we have an unmet need.
So I can say that in terms of referral, I just had a case today where an adult reached out looking for some financial assistance. And in the context of that interaction, I could tell that this person maybe could use some mental health supports as well and pass along Interface's number to that person with a recommendation that she call.
Right.
I will also say, if it helps kind of clarify our role, the Interface referral service, we both refer people to that service, and Interface refers people calling to us as a mental health provider. So we get referrals from Interface.
These are children,
These are
18
children.
or younger.
So for Interface, they have a database of providers in the area who provide mental health counseling.
Okay.
Medfield Youth Outreach is one of those providers in their database. And so Interface has those specifications in their database. Anybody who lives in Medfield who's 18 and younger can be seen by Medfield Youth Outreach. And so they will refer to us when they have clients who they can't find another provider for, which happens. We oftentimes get referrals for clients who have mass health because it is difficult to find providers in the area who take Mass Health and have availability and don't have long wait lists.
And do we charge for it? When that happens, do we get paid by MassHealth?
The point is, I think they can't find another
You
provider.
know, I'm hearing
who-
some comments about how ridiculous it is that I'm pushing back on the town funding health care when the state has a health insurance program designed for this circumstance. I understand it might be administratively difficult, but I'm trying to speak for taxpayers. And the idea that, oh, it's nothing, it is something. It's nothing if it stays small, and it's only rare, but it's something bigger than that if we just simply say, well, when it's hard, we just dump it on the taxpayers because they're too blind to know what we're doing to them. So I'm going to have the obnoxious conversation. I'm a nicer guy than this, and I'm willing to concede points here, but I want that voice in this conversation. Before we just nonchalantly drop this on taxpayers, this town is changing. And some of the people you're worried about helping are some of the people that are hurt the hardest by how this town is changing. And I know that it may be where we're headed, but I don't want to just simply concede it because it's way too much of an administrative hassle, if that's the issue.
So I can speak for, again, for the 4 years that I've been in this position. By and large, the vast majority of the clinical cases we see are people who could not otherwise access mental health services due to finances mostly, but also access in terms of transportation and waiting. There's oftentimes long wait lists. So even if they can afford a copay, they have health insurance, and they find a provider they can get to and their parents are able to drive them to, there's often long wait lists. I think another issue here that I mentioned back in June is access. And it's parents, because we see youth, most of them aren't able to transport themselves to their appointments. They need a parent or guardian to transport them. Many of the people on the lower end of the socioeconomic status get hourly wages. And so in order to drive their child or grandchild to an appointment, they're not only paying the copay, but they're actually missing wages, and that's a huge barrier.
And that's not my target. My target is whether we're precise and we're disciplined in how we do it. So we made the point. It would help me when going forward, just because of all the confusion that we've had even here in this discussion, it would help to be crisper about who we are serving in that way and who we're not. I'm not fighting the idea that we're doing it. I hear you, and so I'm not intending to. If I was prepared to fight that at one point, I'm not going to fight that. You've been holding the microphone, and I have.
I would just say, before we get to Evan, just one point to that. I think as part of developing a little more formalized oversight from the Board of Health, I think this kind of definitional issue would be helpful to include as part of that. And I think if you look at the current composition of the Board of Health, they'd actually be well positioned, I think, to work with what we're currently doing and defining. Because I think that would probably be helpful if we do end up with some kind of regional solution for insurance billing to define what exactly it is we're doing.
And we've talked about the issue of Christine evaluating the youth outreach, and so somehow that has to get figured in as to how to do the evaluation of the clinical services that are provided. Maybe it's just a numbers thing that Christine gets the numbers of sessions that there are, or something of that sort.
So I apologize for getting spun up and forgetting you for a few minutes.
No worries. Evan Weisenfeld, 1 Tallwood Drive. You actually made some of my points. So the longer you let me not talk, Mike just commented on the fact that you were saying that the Board of Health will oversee this is somewhat new. I guess it's more of a clarification because it's been pushed around a lot into different town departments over the years. I'm here to support Chelsea and what the Medfield Youth Outreach Team does and what Dawn used to do, because it's such a critical service for the town and so many people believe so strongly in what it does. Gus, I appreciate your observations, and what you've done is identify a broader need. That doesn't mean what we're doing today should stop. It means that we may have an unmet need that we need to figure out how to support, and that might be doing this research study or a number of other ways to do it, and maybe the youth outreach or youth and family services, whatever you want to call it, does expand, and maybe eventually you do want to be able to bill if it makes sense to, and the study determines that. I agree with Chelsea that the vast majority of people can't support it, would not be able to pay, and therefore the amount of effort and energy that would go into collecting for the small number of people that would pay probably is not a good return on investment. Doesn't necessarily mean taxpayers should cover it, but we've chosen as a community to do so, and maybe we'll look to expand that. It's not something that the town has said we believe there's this huge unmet need, but there is probably something. I think you made a comment on the referrals, and maybe the laughter was, are we getting paid to do referrals? That was, I think, where maybe there was a question about, a referral, the amount of time and energy and work that goes into making a referral may not be worth something that you can charge for.
Yeah, to be clear, I wasn't asking about being paid to make referrals. I was saying when we get a mass health patient referred to us, are we getting paid the mass health rates that the mass health patient?
And it's not how I heard it, so maybe that was some of the clarification.
That was my point.
The idea behind doing this, it sounds like there's a lot more clarity. There's going to be a new director hired. The pay grade is going to change, so this is somebody that would be senior enough and experienced enough to be able to do this. The HIPAA questions are good questions to have, and whether it's through the Board of Health or this new person, clearly some new things need to be defined as to whether it's continuing education or ongoing documentation. If there are HIPAA laws that we need to do, we want the Board of Health and this team to be doing everything the right way. And as long as the town supports it, and again, I feel in the past, the town hasn't. So I'm glad to see that the town does, and maybe the town now knows that this is a strong and important topic for many of the citizens, that it will get the support it needs, that we can now do this right and spread the word as to this being available for those people in need. And this will be something that will be looked back on and say that this was a real turning point and it made a difference. So, thanks.
Let me, yeah, Deb?
Sit down. And it's Debbie Barrow on Copperwood Road. So in the context of your HIPAA discussion, I think it's really important, and it shocks me a little bit that you focus this discussion just in the context tonight on youth outreach or youth and family services, because there are HIPAA regulations that apply to fire and police and council on aging and the schools and possibly the newly resurrected ADA committee and human resources and town hall and a number of other organizations. And I'm not here all the time, but I do talk to one of the selectmen on a regular basis. And I don't hear an awful lot about this sort of, broader-based discussion. So when you're levying your, sort of scrutiny on youth outreach and the myriad of questions that followed it, it concerns me hugely because, as this gentleman said, youth outreach and whatever you call it has been in town and supported by the town and endorsed by the town for decades. And the constituency is a silent and invisible constituency to you because they are not going to come here and they are not going to discuss their concerns, their financial concerns, their mental health, or their health concerns. And so those who come to speak to you, there probably are 100 people for each one of us who sits here who have either had services or who will use services or are using them now. And they're not going to come and speak to you just for those very HIPAA reasons. And we all need to support them and give them dignity. And this idea of trying to figure out who is entitled to service and who is not entitled to service and who has money and who doesn't and whose medical condition or mental health condition warrants services from this department, those are all HIPAA issues. So I suggest then that before we go down that path, maybe we figure out the HIPAA issues that you're worried about with the Council of Aging and the town departments and the school and everywhere else. But it's insulting, I think, to hear it discussed in this fashion. It's not being discussed anywhere else. You're talking about youth outreach and mental health services, and these folks have done huge amount of work on really important issues. So that's, and I am here too, as you can tell, to support Chelsea. So that's what I have to say.
So Deb, I think the point you... Deb, it sounds to me like the point you're making is that we may have greater HIPAA vulnerabilities than we realized, and point taken. I think the reason that it came up here is because we're talking about a clinical service, which is a medical operation. That's a little different in my mind. But I take your point. We may have greater things. The reason it came up at all was because HIPAA violations jeopardize the town if we screw it up.
HIPAA violations jeopardize all of us because when someone's personal information is revealed, that's the biggest assault that anyone can suffer. So yes, you have a liability, but your liability actually is capped per violation under the statute, as far as my recollection. And I may be incorrect on that, but I think it's capped. But the point is that all HIPAA has to do with your medical information. So whether it's youth outreach, or whether it's the schools, or whether it's the police, or the fire, or the council on aging that has a social worker, it's all essentially the same information. You have medical information, healthcare information, right?
I would hope those departments don't all have the same information at the level that
When
I
you say
suspect Chelsea has it.
the same type of information, correct? HIPAA covers, one statute covers the general body of information, protected confidential healthcare information.
If your point is that even names and date of birth are HIPAA protected for someone who's being treated, yeah, you're right.
Yes. So what I'm saying is that you've raised this issue with youth outreach. You haven't raised it with the fire and the police, and you haven't raised it with the Council on Aging, you haven't raised it with the schools, and you haven't said, what are you doing, and
I've
who are you
raised it
serving?
with medical records. I raised it with medical records.
Have you raised it with the Council on Aging?
I don't think they have medical records. Maybe they do.
They
but I
have
don't
mental
think-
health records. They have a social worker. Have you raised it with Town Hall? Have you asked Christine recently? Have you asked yourselves? Because you
As
have
I said,
employees here who have medical issues.
You're making a strong point, Deb, that we have a bigger problem or potential problem than I realize.
I'm not saying it's a problem. It all may be perfectly managed. You don't know.
Right.
That's the problem. It may be perfectly managed,
Right.
but you don't know. But calling out youth outreach to try to answer that question is wrong.
Well,
but that's the topic of this discussion. I mean, so to say that we have to ask every single department every question before we can ask any department that question doesn't make any sense at all.
I'm not
And
saying
so I don't
that.
think it's insulting to ask a professional social worker what they're doing. And she answered it professionally and in an appropriate way. I don't think it's insulting for the Board of Selectmen to actually take an interest in how town departments are run and to actually be knowledgeable about facts about the municipality. I don't think that's inappropriate either.
No, and you're
so I think
right.
it's appropriate for us to exercise an oversight role because, as to your point, I mean, occasionally even, sometimes mental health providers make mistakes. And there are lawyers who sue mental health providers who make mistakes. It's just like there's doctors. We love doctors. They're wonderful. Sometimes they make mistakes and they get sued and their patients get injured. Okay? And the people who are responsible for overseeing them, which ultimately is us, this is a town department that ultimately comes to us. So to say that it's insulting to engage in oversight because we haven't asked the question of the school department, which has its own elected committee that handles that. So, I mean, it's not our job to oversee the HIPAA regulations of the school committee. It is our job to oversee this. So I don't think it's an insulting question to ask. And look, should we ask this question the next time the fire chief is in? Sure. Should we ask the question next? Sure, we should ask those questions. But we also have, partially because of what we did in ALS, partially what we do with the police department, I mean, I feel I have a much deeper, in-depth understanding of how those departments are run and managed. They are bigger. They have more administrative staff. They have a different, and I understood what that regulatory regime is. Until June, I didn't understand what the regulatory regime was of this department. And I think in general, the department kind of operated on its own. And I think to its detriment in some circumstances because it was sort of forgotten and not supported. But from an oversight standpoint, which is appropriate, it was not. And the Board of Health previously was not terribly interested in exercising any oversight over the Medfield Youth Outreach. And so that was a concern that we had, that there's no oversight. I think we are correcting that and improving that situation. So to say it's insulting to ask the question is I don't even know where you're coming from on that.
Well, I will stand corrected on that, but what I will say is this, is that you started this conversation in June, and you're asking the question now, mid-September, about something that's really basic to, are you going to have a department or are you not? And what are the services and who's going to pay for the services and what kind of information needs to be made available?
I think it's an incorrect characterization. This has never been a debate about whether we're going to have a department or not. It's been a discussion around what services the department will provide, referral versus actual clinical services. I'm not sure that it's worth a whole lot more time to debate this, because the issues that I had to do with potential vulnerabilities that the town had in terms of liability, either for malpractice, and we have an answer for that, and for HIPAA compliance. I think from what Chelsea said, that there's probably some room to tighten things up and to make sure that everything's up to speed. But I don't think that was I think we are on a path to be able to deal with that. So I don't think that that's automatically something that takes the clinical services off track. I've heard enough here tonight that I'm not against the clinical service. I'm not on principle fighting either for liability issues or even for need issues. As Chelsea, you've eloquently expressed what you're trying to do. I hear it. I am asking for precision, but and you know why I'm asking for precision, because I'm sitting there trying to be a voice for taxpayers. If taxpayers are going to pay for things, I'd like to know what they're paying for and what they're not paying for, not just to allow things to grow. But that's just a kind of a circumstance in terms of defining what we're all about, what we're trying to do here.
So until I heard this last resident's extremely astute comments, I hadn't thought about the fact that the fire department is absolutely providing medical care. Every time there's an ambulance run, we are providing medical care to a Medfield resident.
That's clearly HIPAA. That's probably the one situation where there's an interface. But a whole lot of HIPAA has to do with the medical providers versus providing a third party like insurers. That's where the protections are. That's what the focus is. It's not the general confidentiality which is there from separate sources.
So the second point that I wanted to make is that I think what we do with the Youth and Family Services Department, as it's now going to be called apparently, is that we've hired professionals and we trust them to run it in accordance with their professional status. And so that there are things that social workers can tell Christine and some things that they can't. And so that some information will get shared and the private information will not get shared.
On that point, the public information I would like, doesn't drive any decisions here, but just for information, I would actually like to know what the trends are in the services we provide. Numbers of people treated, the duration, number of visits or duration, I'm not sure what the right way, and the issues. And how those trends, if it was 40 years to prove that we've done it for 40, I don't think anybody's got those records, but.
I actually have a box of records in my office.
Well, I don't
40 years ago.
I don't necessarily want you to electrify all of boxes of paper records going back 40 years. I would be curious, going back 5 to 10 years, if that's doable.
Yeah, well, we actually submit an annual report every year that outlines, again, with de-identified information, trends in types of numbers of referrals, numbers of clients, numbers of clinical hours, trends in what we're seeing, depression, anxiety.
Okay.
So we do submit an annual report every year.
That's a part of the annual report?
It's in the annual report. It's within the Board of Health
All right,
report.
then it's my research. Okay.
So the other point that I would make, Gus, is you've been talking about unmet needs in town, and I think that is a real issue for the town. All you have to do is read the adolescent health survey that's done every year or two by the Metro West Foundation, and to read about the fact that a third of our high school students have been drinking alcohol in the past 30 days, that a third of them are using marijuana in the last 30 days, even though we know statistically, scientifically, that those kids are going to be at much higher incidence of addiction later in life. That a lot of what interests me about the youth outreach is how they are trying to solve these problems for our town of kids that are hurting themselves by this socially acceptable, we'll let them drink behavior, when we know that statistically we're going to end up with kids that have alcoholism later in life, that they're going to have drug issues later in life. The brains are not formed in humans until they're in their mid-20s, and the use of these chemicals basically changes the brain structure.
Yeah,
so
and the point I've made is some of the most devastating things in the town have not been 18 and younger. It's been older than that. So, but your point's well taken. I think there's one last issue that I prompted in my message to Molly, which was the issue of the advisory board, and this is a point for us to discuss. Here's what I think I understand has happened with the advisory board. It was established in 2016. I believe that was the last time that the advisory board really went back to the selectmen for reappointment, as far as I can tell. The advisory board on its own expanded its membership, and it replaced members who stepped down. As far as I know, that was all done without the selectmen's actions. At first, I was disturbed by that. And then I thought about it, and I said, this is a board that, by what I've seen of your own draft charter, is partly an advocacy board for youth outreach. And I kind of turned around from being disturbed by the fact that this was a board that was operating on its own without the selectmen to saying, why do the selectmen need to get their nose stuck into what the advisory board does? Why don't we let you do what it is you want to do, which is to support youth outreach, leave you alone, move that off the town-appointed boards with the presumed control of the selectmen, let you act in the best interests of youth outreach. So just so you understand where I came from in that point, it's like, I think we need to get out of your hair. I don't see what we're doing that is of any meaningful purpose. I do think there may be at some, if we can get to a board that is that, what I'll call strategic board, that gives us advice about what the emerging needs are across the entire town population, I think that could be a useful board to have. That may take us a while to even figure out what that should do. But just so you know, that's where I came out on the advisory board, is you don't need to have us appoint you. Run yourselves. And I want you to stay. I applaud the volunteerism. I applaud the interest. So it's not a rejection. It's like, why should we get in your way? Just do it. You for 3 years you've done it, and it's worked fine.
So Gus, when I heard you raise this issue, I asked some questions, and what I heard back was that the only person that had been appointed was Molly Frankel, and that since the board was originally appointed, and that Don Alcott had brought Molly's appointment to Mike Sullivan, and Mike Sullivan had just never brought it to us, so that it just never got to us. It was properly forwarded to the Board of Selectmen, but it just never arrived, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And shame on the Board of Selectmen if we didn't write a charter and a mission for the Youth Outreach or Advisory Board, but apparently when they got our request to describe what they did, my understanding is Chelsea wrote a response to that, and so that, that's not writing your own mission, that's just saying, sharing what we do.
My point is, an 8 or 10 person board overseeing 2 people and supporting 2 people, I think that's great. But to your, so they came, it didn't come to the selectmen. It's like, I don't see how we would have added value in this whole process.
Well, I would suggest that we leave it up to them to decide whether they want to be a town committee or just be a separate.
No, I think that's a selectman decision on whether or not to be a town committee.
And I would suggest that we ask the town committee, as we ask all other town committees, their opinion on it
I'm
before
happy
we
to hear
disband
that.
them.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to hear that.
Does anybody know why the selectmen asked us to be appointed in 2016?
My understanding
We
was.
used to be Friends of Medfield Youth
Yeah,
Outreach, and we were
that's-
told we couldn't do that anymore. We needed to have a board. I know you guys weren't here but
Pete was.
Yeah, I was here, and
so the selectmen requested that we do that, and we got appointed, and in our defense, you never invited us back to be reappointed.
so my
That is
understanding.
100% true.
And
I
now-
left it off my
And
list.
now we're saying, why the heck aren't you the Friends of the Medfield Youth Outreach?
So,
Well, you've heard my opinion. I think you should be what you were, Kathy.
I'm not sure what the pros and cons are of being an appointed board.
I'm happy to.
Well,
give
I think the cons are, you have to post your meetings, you have to take the minutes, there's a lot of regulatory issues that we bind you
We've
to.
always
a
done
quorum.
that, even when we were friends of.
Yeah.
The other piece from my standpoint, and I've spoken out before on committees that are chartered to be an advocacy committee. Personally, I don't think it's appropriate for a town committee to be basically defined as an advocacy committee. So if you're a committee that's an advisory committee trying to help the town, acting on behalf of the town, navigate something, then I like it. when you're a committee that's formed that has a predisposed assignment of where it's going. The issue that I raised here probably over a year ago was the Community Preservation Act Committee. It's not, I mean, if the town wants a Community Preservation Act, go do it. But if we have a committee to promote the Community Preservation Act, that's presuming something about where the town wants to go that doesn't really need a committee. If you want to do that, the selectmen can vote to do it. So I don't like committees that have an advocacy, a predefined advocacy position for something. I would rather have committees that are truly advisory, that I can expect would use an honest, objective. They'll advocate for things along the way, but I'd like to know they're looking at it with an objective voice.
The Community Preservation Act Study Committee, I think was what it was originally called, is a bad example because they originally studied it and they recommended against the Community Preservation
We
Act.
kept it around, yeah, we kept it, but we kept it around. Even after we said no, we still kept it around for some reason. As a contrasting example, I was in favor of the Medfield Rail Trail group trying to promote the rail trail. So it's not like I'm, it wasn't deciding whether or not, it was just figuring out how to do it. But anyway, that's my predisposition on committees.
And I think because the Board of Health said they were much more of, they processed the, ordering or claims, and they really didn't have any. I think that's why the selectmen,
that
was
may
my
be.
understanding.
Yeah.
That was my
That they
understanding.
wanted a group that actually took an interest.
Yeah,
And
the Board of Health had no interest in overseeing the youth outreach, and at the time, the suggestion was made to have a town board that would.
I think that's 100% accurate, but I'm also concerned that now that our insurance rests on being
Right.
with under the auspices of the Board of Health, I also don't want to give Chelsea or whoever the director is going to be multiple boards and
Right.
layers of people
Right.
that she has to report to.
Right. But none of this is saying that I hope the committee doesn't continue to do what they're doing. This is not that. It's just, it actually is really a governance issue. And, yeah.
Can I make a motion then that we proceed with the posting and hiring of a youth outreach director?
Christine, we're in good shape?
Forthwith.
I think
Fine
we're.
with me, yeah.
Sure.
Second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Yep.
Aye. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you for your
Chelsea.
time.
It gets easier from here, Chelsea. All right, you did do a good job. And that's for the second time in a row.
Well, mental health services.
All right. Poor Jean probably wishes that she somehow or another slipped into the pre-Mike Marcucci.
So thanks for the opportunity to come back. We're really excited to start the conversation about what the process should be around the lease for the chapel and infirmary for the cultural center up at the State Hospital. Since the October special town meeting that authorized the selectmen to enter the agreement and the state signing off on it in July, this is really the last key step in order for us to launch a campaign by demonstrating town commitment. We're excited that Vicki Sheps will be representing the Cultural Alliance in the process. She sends her regrets for not being here. She had an out-of-state commitment previously scheduled. But Vicki's a longtime Medfield resident with a real estate law practice in Stoughton for over 25 years. She's also an avid photographer, so we're excited about that skill set that she brings as well. She actually worked with Mark on the Dwight Derby House lease in 1999. So, and Mark had provided us with a draft of that lease back in January, perhaps as a place to start in terms of thinking about how we might move forward through this one. You have, I think, an outline of the basic lease terms. That was per Mark's request, suggesting some of the things that we would foresee be addressed within the lease. It's not exhaustive, but it's a good place to start. And I think we're here basically for Mark to be directed so that we could move forward, that Mark and Vicki could have a conversation about some of the details of those things that we would then present back to you. I think a significant difference in this process from the Dwight Derby House, clearly the buildings aren't in any condition to be occupied at this point in time. So the concept would be to have a lease with basic terms
with additional terms specific to 3 phases. And those phases that we see would be what we're calling assessment, which essentially is this fundraising phase, and then a construction phase, and then the use and occupancy phase after that. So there's be some difference conditions governing each of those phases as we move forward, but it would allow us to enter into the lease now.
Remind me, Mark, under the special legislation, is it just authorized for a lease or is it authorized for a sale as well?
My recollection, it was either one.
Either one.
It also, when it got up to the legislature, they tacked in some requirements of compliance with some portions of the disposition statute 30B, section 16. So we have to, there's some notice requirements that have to be done before we really finalize things. I don't know whether this was emailed to me at my Franklin address. I haven't actually seen it, so I did request Vicki to put it together. I wasn't looking for the legislation, I was looking for the checklist.
Okay.
Shall I raise my issue while Mark's
Yeah, sure.
reading?
Yeah.
So my main issue, Gene, is just that there be clearly defined markers along the way so that the town isn't obligated for 99 years on a process that is not going to forward to fruition.
Right.
And so
I have that same.
Yeah, I think that's point 5 of the outline in terms of having an option for an annual review and confirming that there's adequate support to move
Well,
forward.
there just needs to be written in somehow, whatever can be
Right.
figured out in terms of those things that need to be achieved or
Sure.
however that's going to work.
Yep, we agree.
Yeah, I would, unless the 99 years is something essential to your financial model, I would wholly concur that the lease should be somehow phased or certain benchmarks that need to be met, and then at some point, longer chunks of lease term.
So just because I had the same reaction that Pete had to that, and my thought was that there should be some milestone, and not to squeeze you, not a milestone that squeezes you and you're not sure you can make it, but rather a milestone that buffers you so that you know what you think how far you think you're going to be able to get. This might be a deadline that's beyond that, so that if a year or two is a setback, but it seemed to me that if it's a 99-year lease, but you don't get the first phase done within whatever you think would be a reasonable window, that would kind of like terminate. If it's not going to work, it's not going to work.
Right.
5, when I looked at it, I wrote down, does this mean the town has an opt-out option every year? If we don't like, that seems a little too risky for you guys, that if the town can kind of say, oh, you're not, you're at the mechanism there seemed pretty.
Yeah, so you obviously don't have details, and we haven't reviewed any of that
Right.
with Mark, but it's more of a process, so we would have a conversation about where we've come to. There'd be a point if there's a disagreement about whether or not to continue to proceed. There's a cooling off period, there's
Okay.
another review period if we still can't get to agreement, there's an
Okay.
arbitration process. So we
Okay.
were thinking through that exact scenario,
Okay.
guys.
All right, okay.
And the other, again, I just throw this out, but as a model, some years ago, the YMCA was interested in building a facility, and we entered into some sort of informal MOU, memorandum of understanding with them, and they were given a certain period of time to do their fundraising and make a determination of feasibility before we entered into a more detailed arrangement with them. So that might be a model as well.
My point would be to not commit to something for 99 years that doesn't get out the gate, but also not put you in such a bind that if we have a recession and, the generosity of donors fades a while, that you're not
Right.
kind of like just wiped out by the
Yeah.
racing cars that go by as you're crossing the road.
I think the most critical things from some of the models we've had before is before they take physical possession and actually start doing things, whether it's demo or construction or what have you, that there be some financial benchmarks that have been met. We've had experiences mixed in that area. 56 acres of ball fields was one thing. Dwight Derby House was another example, so.
So one concern that I have is I share the same concern that Pete and Gus have with respect to meeting the milestones, but I guess I'm not as worried about that. Bigger concern is the liability to the town in leasing the property to what is essentially an entity without any assets at the moment, right? And one of the benefits to the town of this transaction is that you're taking a piece of the hospital property that has been analyzed to essentially be not a profitable piece of property for market sale, and taking whatever liabilities are associated with that building off the town's balance sheet. If it's a lease, it's kind of still on ours because we're the owner. And so I'd like to understand if essentially the building falls in on somebody and gets hurt, or if there's an ordered environmental remediation or something that has to happen with respect to that building at a point in time before the Cultural Alliance of Medfield is in a position to make good on its obligation to be responsible for the building, what happens then, right? So that's why I asked the question about the sale. If it was sold to you and you were the owner, the town would have no liability about it whatsoever. You own it and you'd be the owner. You couldn't come back to the town of Medfield and say, well, you should never have sold them the property. And so I don't know realistically, what the actual risk is of that building versus some others. And so I wanted a little input from John Thompson on that. But that's a concern that I have. I'm happy to give you as much runway as you have, but I think that there's an obvious benefit on day one to the town if this problem is not our problem anymore. Sort of one down and 31 to go at that point.
So just to clarify, the legislation was authorized to lease up to 99 years.
So no sale.
No sale. My understanding, I don't know this for a fact, but that 99-year leases are viewed as essentially the equivalent of a sale.
Right, but I would imagine in terms of owner's liability, if the tenant defaulted, it would still fall back to us. We would still be liable for it. So it wouldn't have the effect of getting it off our books.
If there's a microphone somewhere within Bill Massaro's reach, Bill, could you just comment on the lease, the agreement we have with the town regarding this around isolated?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment or throw some information back based on Mike's concern about town responsibility, relieving the town of the responsibility for that building and everything else. The other thing that the lease does is it relieves any potential developer of the property of about $15 million of redevelopment costs or redesign costs or rehab costs for that property.
1.5 million?
$15 million.
1.5.
1.5.
No.
No, 15.
15.
15.
You're talking remediation?
The construction cost in the financial model, I have issues.
Total construction, not just remediation, total construction.
No, the total construction cost for a developer, if it stayed in the developer's hands and stayed in the master plan as a developer item, according to the McCabe, is 15 point something million dollars out of $200 or $300 million worth of development costs. So it's significant in terms of a relief to a developer. I would expect that, given some of the responses that since I haven't seen all of the responses, but I believe that some of the responses that came in to the new development committee, essentially they were not objecting to anything relating to the chapel and everything else. They probably, if they really looked hard at the numbers, would have been relieved to see that Gene was magnanimously taking that responsibility.
What stuck in my head with Gene was in the model, just the remediation or remediation / demolition I thought was 1.5 million for those two buildings. So that was, when you said 15, I thought you were off by a decimal, but that's the full construction. That's not just the remediation.
Right.
Yeah.
Correct.
Anything else? Pete, anything else? So I had a couple, I think a lot of these are just details. First, this is for both the chapel and the infirmary.
Correct?
So that's what the lease is all about. And the thing that was not clear to me in the points here, although I don't think it's in dispute, is it talks about the tenant will be responsible for all expenses related to the property for the duration of the lease, including insurance on premises, utilities, and other expenses incurred by their use of the premises. But you're also accepting the responsibility for the remediation costs as well. So I would hope the lease would make clear that that's part of your, I mean, that's how it's been represented, but I think the lease should make clear that the remediation is also something that's included in that lease. And those are the only additional points I had beyond the phasing that we already talked about.
I hadn't thought about it before, but we could require Gene to take the cafeteria as well.
You're still trying, Pete.
I know, I want you to
God
take it.
bless you.
We could make it mandatory.
It's 5.25 times the size of the chapel.
As long as you throw in 27A and 26-2.
Oh, they're
She does
connecting
have a
buildings,
plan
of
for it.
course.
I do.
She has a
yeah.
plan for it.
This was another point that the legislature seized upon, and they were very emphatic in tightening the language that it's only the immediate property surrounding the building. So somebody up there was concerned that we were giving away the farm, so to speak.
And I guess I do have a question about how we actually define it. I mean, 3 sides are bordered by roads, but the north side isn't. It's just mostly grass up to the clubhouse or the parking lot. And I'm not sure how we do that or what the town's interests are in filing.
There probably needs to be a survey, I would assume, of the actual,
I think there is a survey. There was a survey.
no, of that parcel, of that.
I think there's a survey of the whole thing.
There's a survey of the whole property, but I think what Pete's talking about is a survey of just what we would
Just
break
No, I
down
was
as
looking at
a
leasing,
town.
what is it we're actually
Right.
leasing?
No, that would be important to
Yeah.
know.
It's gotta be, it's gotta be defined one way or the other.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm not sure that the footprints were even defined when the master plan was looking at leasing the buildings, because they originally were talking about like a 10-foot square around the buildings, 10-foot border around the
Right.
buildings. I don't know where they wound up.
I think it's, yeah, I guess that actually is how it was talked about, yeah.
Why don't we work on that while we're working on the lease agreement? See
Thank
what
you.
makes the most sense.
Great.
Yeah. I think that's, thank you, Gene.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Did you get through all the action items?
The only thing we did not do is the vote to call the special town meeting.
Yes.
Okay. I had one question as I was marking up the minutes from the last meeting. Is there a reason the Transfer Station and Recycling Committee's reappointment is not on the agenda?
Yes, because they would like to actually come in and speak to you.
Ah.
And given what we already had on the agenda, I was going to push them to the October meeting.
Okay, good, all right.
So I guess the last action item we have is the vote to call a November 18th special town meeting for the Medfield State Hospital zoning.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Yep.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, that's passed. No discussion items, nothing pending. Town administrator update.
I just have one brief thing I want to talk about, and we're formalizing this with a memo that we will release to the selectmen, the school committee, and I've had some brief discussions with the warrant committee. Nick and I are starting to meet with department heads to go over their budgets and basically ask them to build their budgets from the ground up for us, and justify what they're spending and where we are. About a month ago, a little less than a month ago, we got a call out of the blue from Moody's, which is our bond rating agency. And they were concerned about our fiscal year 2018 audit and the amount of free cash we had used in addition to our declining fund balances in terms of the MSBA money. So they gave us a series of warnings that were rather stern. They did like what we did in fiscal year 20, which we just did at this past year's town meeting. They like that we have a financial policy. They like that we are sticking to that financial policy, but they strongly urge us to keep our free cash usage down and build our fund balances up so that in 2023, when the MSBA money is gone and we are looking in 2024 for the school building, that we have significant reserves to contain our AA1 rating. So I issue that as a warning to all of us as we're starting to put our budgets together, that Moody's is paying close attention to what we're doing and how we're spending.
Unfortunately, we don't have any major financing for a year, 2 years or so, or maybe 3 years, so we have some time to do something about it.
Correct, and they did like the steps that we took in this past year's town meeting, and they strongly urged us to continue to do that.
Don't have any Board of Selectmen actions. We passed the consent calendar. Before we get to minutes, I have just one question. I see we have a scout in the audience. I just want to make sure, is this just like citizenship in the community that you're here for, or there's nothing you wanted to talk to us about?
I think you would like to speak to you at the end of the meeting.
Oh, okay,
Correct.
that's okay, yeah. But you were sitting here, you stuck through all the lively stuff, and you're still here, so I just wanted to make sure that there wasn't any, before we usually have citizen comment, and we didn't have anybody sign up for it, so just making sure.
You're not looking to get an Eagle project approved? I notice
Okay.
he's already a life, so.
All right, well, good. So the next item I think is the acceptance or correction of meeting minutes. I will plead major league delinquency on not being as prepared as I should have been, but I just ran out of time.
Those are my corrections to the
Oh, okay.
September 3.
Oh, wow, okay.
And
September.
those are the ones you emailed to me today?
Oh, these are three copies or 3 pages worth of correction?
3 copies.
Okay, 3 copies. So we'll pass those
I
down.
emailed them to Chris, but
Yes, I have them by email.
tells me that I'm not allowed to share them with you except at a meeting.
Right, right.
So there they are.
And I had a number of changes as well that I emailed to Christine and Marion
So
as well.
maybe we should defer this one, because I've gotten about to page 10 of that 13-page set of minutes. I'm on Quarry Road, and I have a lot of stuff that'll be far easier for me to electronically change and then get it to you that way. So
So
I'll just,
what we've been doing is when you send the corrections to us electronically, you tend to have similar ideas on what you'd want to have changed. If any of you are in opposition with each other of something that wanted to be changed, then I would bring it back to you, but for the most
That's
part,
right, yeah.
you've been different with your changes.
and the reason I do the electronic is if, like 75, 80% of my electronic are actually, that apostrophe doesn't belong there, change this, so they're not substantive.
Right.
And it's like, it's far easier, rather than you hunting for where I did things, it's easier just to give you the thing
No, that's
and
fine. We
change it.
appreciate that.
So that's why I do it that way. All right, well, so we'll defer the December 3rd,
Yeah.
I mean, September 3rd for November 27th.
So Pete, just looking at your top suggested edit here, I think one of my suggested edits would solve this problem.
Okay.
Which is, I basically took everything that Kathy said and just put it according to Kathy McCabe on it, as opposed to the selectman endorsing the particular history that she had laid out. Because I could have done the same thing with a number of things that she said that I
Yeah.
thought, again, they weren't false, but I think it was her take on what had
Yeah,
happened
okay,
and
all
what had
right.
been decided. So I
Yep,
kinda-
as long as it doesn't get written into the town history.
so
as
that's
being-
why I thought, so I put that in there according to, so, I didn't say allegedly according to, but I did make that change, because I noticed a couple other things in there as well that I thought might be points of contest.
I'm glad we caught that Mike wasn't voted out, he was just outvoted.
I know, sadly.
Yeah.
It's like, voted out.
My wife would be very happy to read it.
Vote him out of
As
the
I said,
off the
voted
island.
out.
We just,
Yeah.
So we'll defer that, I'll send that.
So which of these minutes can we do?
We can do the 18th and the 8th, is what I have.
December 18th and January 8th?
Yep.
I've looked at those, right? And I've commented on those.
And I can get you the 18th in electronic version, but I don't have it here. And what I would like to do is, there's a bunch of it's editorial, but I just want to let you guys know, because actually, going back that far, I had I was trying to remember what the point was, and there were different ways of rewording to make different points. So if I can do that, then
Sure.
I can. So on the 8th, that was all editorial. Okay. So there was a statement on page 3. Selectman Marcucci discussed the risk of public subsidies on the site. There'll be town risk up front in completing the master plan. The firms that don't need subsidies have indicated they would not go in the direction of the mixed-use master plan, would strictly build single-family housing on the site. Selectmen discussed tax abatements as liability to the town. Oh, it was only a question. Is that what you said? So discuss the risk of public subsidies on the site. There'll be.
You know, I went and read that. I'm sure that's not what I said. But I know I think that's probably combining several things that I said.
Okay.
I didn't have the time to go back and watch the meeting to see what I actually said.
It didn't feel like a violation to you. So,
I mean, I think,
okay.
I think I was talking about the risk to the town.
Right.
If we are taking on this
So it captures
role
the
of
spirit.
oversight.
Okay.
It's close enough. I'm not gonna go back and watch it, but,
Okay,
you know,
so that was
that's
one
not what I said,
I
but-
snagged on. Yeah, incidentally, as I'm looking at names, Ken Richard is no S on the end.
no, that's not.
And then farther down that page, Selectman Marcucci stated the role of the BOS is to determine if that is still the focus. We have a liability issue with taking the buildings down and leaving them up. If liability was 0, then we would take them down, less of an economic driver to move this forward. The cost is still unknown, and I said, I don't know what this sentence is trying to say. So it's
Sure, I didn't say
that,
that
it's that
either,
underlying
but, yeah.
sentence there, that one there. I just couldn't, I didn't know what it was saying.
Stated that the role of the BS.
Mike's making me feel a lot better about my long-term memory being as shaky as it
Just
is.
as a
Yeah,
thought,
I remember saying that if the cost of taking the buildings down was 0, we would not be proposing the master plan as written.
Yeah.
And so we wouldn't have to we wouldn't be doing this plan if it was $0 to take the building down.
Okay.
And so you wouldn't have to deal with the cost of
Okay.
that. So I mean, again, I read this, I said, I probably didn't say it that way. I'm sure it's not
So
false.
I'll
in the
take a
sense
crack
that-
at rewording that based
Yeah.
on what I just heard, because I understand what you said.
That's what, and
Okay.
the risk of public subsidy is the risk if we are overseeing the property.
Right,
And
okay.
have continued role in oversight, there's a risk to the town in failing to have the process succeed because the town's continually mucking around in the
Okay.
business of the
Got it.
development.
Then on page 4, on the paragraph right above action items, it says, town may need to, the very last sentence, town may need to add positions based, this has to do with staffing up to manage the project. Town may need to add positions based on regulatory functions, but town shouldn't be this is the words it says, shouldn't be hiring just a real estate specialist for the project or OPM like we had in the public safety building. And what I couldn't figure out is whether it was, but the town shouldn't only be hiring a real estate specialist for the project or an OPM like we had on the public safety building, or whether it was the town shouldn't, there was another way I could have, I know what, the town shouldn't be hiring a real estate specialist just for the project or an OPM like we had on the public. So I wasn't sure what the words, depending on where you put just, it means something completely different. I think we were saying the town shouldn't hire just, it's not just a
Well,
matter of
see, I
hiring a
think
real
that is
estate
summarizing a discussion that we did not agree on. Because the point about not hiring a real estate person certainly was something I said.
Right.
And that if we needed to hire someone to oversee the regulatory issues, such as a second building commissioner to do building inspections, that
Yep.
might be appropriate. This was over the discussion about whether the town would hire a point person, because there was a comment from the development committee, the developers wanted a point person to deal with from the town. And I think there was a disagreement among us as to whether we would be hiring a point person who would then be responsible for making ongoing development decisions, which I was against. I think Pete was more open to hiring that sort of a person.
Okay.
And so I think that is a summary of a discussion, that we were having the discussion, but there was no particular conclusion on that point.
So you were saying what? What was it
I
that
was
you
saying
were
we should not be hiring a real estate person to oversee development at the state hospital or have any role in kind of making development decisions. In other words, as
Okay.
part of my overall point, the town should not be the developer of the property. We should not be hiring a person whose job is to act like they're sort of the developer of the property. But if we go ahead with this and that there's an increased burden on the town's regulatory functions, I could see, for example, like Millis hired a second building commissioner to deal with the construction at Glen Ellen, who was Gary Pelletier, who's now our building commissioner. But, so he was on site there to help deal with the legitimate oversight and regulatory function of the government, as opposed to somebody who's a liaison and is going to be making ongoing development kind of decisions or that sort of thing.
I'll
I
take
think
my
there's a
best
disagreement on
crack
that
at
point.
that, and when we look at it
least that's what
again,
I recall
that's
that
fair,
discussion.
but I'll take my best crack at
Yeah.
trying to word that in a way that,
It was one of the recommendations of the planning, Medfield Selectmen Planning Committee, that the town was understaffed to deal with a development of this size, and that I think they recommended an attorney or a real estate person to be hired to
but I
deal with it.
I think Mike is saying, well, actually, we should just hand it to a developer, and the developer drives it, and we carry out the town's regulatory
Right.
functions. That was your point.
That's contrary to
Yeah,
what the
yeah.
reuse committee was
I get it,
saying,
yeah.
which is that
Right.
because the town is understaffed, it needs to hire the person to do this.
I'm just trying to figure out what he was saying. I think I get
Okay.
it. Okay. And then the last thing was on the last page. Selectman Murby discussed affordable housing, which is being covered by the Medfield High School newspaper.
I think there was an article, I think there was an article on affordable housing that you got interviewed in the Medfield High School newspaper, and you read the article and you thought it was a good article. I remember
There
that.
goes the
That's
long-term
right. So now
memory.
I wrote down, I can't remember, but now that you say that, that's what we were talking about. Yeah, okay, so I got that. So I will update this with all of my stuff.
Send it
And I'll also update the September 3rd with the rest of my stuff, some of which I haven't done yet, and let's.
So we'll put that, we'll hold that off.
We'll hold that off.
Yeah, no, I read that one, and I just didn't have the time to do what you did, Gus, so thank you for doing it, but.
All right. So I think the only one, as far as I can see, that's going to get through unscathed is the January 8th, which I thought was okay.
I gave you comments on that, so
I
they're
haven't.
in there, yeah.
Are you okay with January 8th?
Sure.
Meeting minutes?
I vote to approve the minutes from January 8.
I second.
As amended by Mike's inputs to Christine. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So are we still waiting on all of these?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
We
I'm
didn't
the
even
main
do May
culprit.
28th? This is May 28th, like, that was just me and Pete, wasn't it?
Oh, if it's just you two.
Wasn't that one of those, or no? Am I confusing it with something else?
You're confusing that with one of the other ones.
Oh, maybe that was May 28th.
There was one you were laughing at me because I had corrections on a meeting I wasn't at, but I didn't vote to approve those. So,
Yeah, so we gotta do May 28th and September 3rd, and then,
Yes,
once we
I'm
do
gonna-
those three, will we be caught up?
You're getting close. I have
November
2 more
20
sets that I just got today that I'll send you.
we got November 27th too, right? Is it?
We've gotten that,
It's on the list.
yeah. We have that, right? We have some.
They've
Yeah,
already-
but well, we just haven't I haven't gotten
Yeah.
comments yet.
Okay, that's
We're getting
approved.
close to caught up is the point.
Yeah, I'll be okay for the next meeting. It's just I've been toast all summer. Everything else is deferred. Okay. Selectmen report.
So, on September 5th, the Affordable Housing Trust Board met, and ousted me as the chairman, so Jim Brand is now the chairman of.
You were voted out.
Yes, I was voted out. And so Jim is going to be the chairman of the board of the Affordable Housing Trust. Our two new members, Carrie McCormick and Brett Hayman, were there for the meeting. Our principal activity was to go over the draft RFP for the Hinckley property project. We had some feedback for Sarah on that, and she's revising it. I think she's going to run it by each of you as well, just to see if you have any comments on it. Process-wise, once that's issued, it will come back to the board of the trust for a recommendation of the selectmen for the contract and the developer for the sale and all of that. So ideally, the trust board wants to be in a position to approve the issuance of that RFP at our next meeting, the first Thursday in October. So I don't know if has Sarah sent it to you or?
No.
Okay, if we could just make sure that was.
Yep.
I think she's still, I gave her, I had to tell her what my handwritten comments were because she couldn't read my handwriting today. So I suspect she's putting in those edits from our last meeting before she'll send it to you. But ideally, we'll get that done the first Thursday in October, and be in a position to issue it. From an overall timing standpoint, based on the schedule laid out, I mean, we'd be looking at, first quarter of next year to be in a position to issue, to enter an agreement with the developer on that. And then I think there's no further update on the collective bargaining other than to say there's not going to be an article on the special town meeting warrant related to the police contract. So we're continue to negotiate, but that won't be part of the special town meeting. Whatever will be done at the next annual town meeting. So,
The townwide master planning committee met the same time that we met on August 29, so I missed the meeting, but a couple points from that. The important one is that they set up a public forum so that everybody should know that they have an opportunity to have input into the master plan for the town, the next 20 years of the town of Medfield. It's going to take place on Sunday, October 20, 5 to 7:30 p.m. You get dinner. There'll be a raffle prize, too. It's going to be at, I think it's at the middle school, from memory, from the handout on Medfield Day.
nifty logo too. I saw the logo.
Yeah, it's a nice logo. They thought it was important to have branding that way, so we've got branding. So I did stand around at their booth on Medfield Day and accosted people and was asking them if they were Medfield residents. Cindy Green gave me that intro. That was a good one to know who to force material on then, because we had a handout about the public forum that's coming up. Medfield Day seemed to go off really nicely until it rained at the end of the day, but congratulations to Memo on a great event for the town. I spent my time at the master planning booth, the Medfield Foundation booth, and the Medfield Cares About Prevention booth. And they had a great wheel that entertained a lot of kids, I think. So there was some progress on the derelict house that we had talked about at a last meeting. So that's good that it's now enclosed in a fence, and apparently Gary Pelletier is doing a good job of moving the owner along towards what needs to get done. There was a Medfield Coalition for Suicide Prevention meeting this past week. They've got this installation on Jean's Straw Hat Park out back. It looks good. It's interactive. I think it was based on something that happened in Natick, but it's clearly a good idea. And then I sent off some information to Lisa Donovan, who's the she's the outreach coordinator at the Council on Aging. She and I had a discussion about a property tax relief for seniors. So I sent her all the materials that I got at the the Massachusetts Selectmen's Association meeting in June. The selectman from one of the towns up north, Reading maybe, had put me in touch with his assessor, because they'd opted to provide property tax relief for their seniors who had been in town for a length of time, who met income criteria, asset criteria through the circuit breaker. And he was also the assessor for an adjoining town, so that he gave me both of the towns' formulas for doing that. And I also had collected materials from Sudbury, who's doing a similar thing a while ago. And so I sent those to Lisa so that she may be trying to organize that in the future. And that's it.
And I don't have too much to report, certainly going backwards. I've been out of town way too much over the last month and a half, but two things coming up tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. There's a meeting at the state hospital with the state to talk about the road that has not yet been put in, but maybe put in. I can make that, so I'll plan to be there to see how that conversation goes. And I've been in ongoing email conversations with Chief Garrett around the two intersections on North Street, the North Street, Harding Street fork, and the Harding Street Hospital Road fork, in terms of how they were striped. And I'm looking forward to a lively debate with the chief about how we might make those intersections more easily navigable while abiding by the rules about striping, as she's been teaching me, which, as I look at it, are probably counterproductive from a public safety standpoint. So one of two things is going to happen. Either those stripes are going to get turned in different directions, or one of the stripes is going to get turned in another direction, or you all are going to start seeing more stop signs than we've had in the past on the route out of the center of town. More to come.
I like her painting of the intersection out here next to the townhouse to provide a turn space into James Avenue. I think that works well,
Mhm.
although I think people ignore it. But I'd also mention about the chief that I saw her on Labor Day, I think it was. She was working on Labor Day. And I commented on that to her, that, and she told me that she often tries to take the holiday shifts so that the officers can have the day off, which was nice to hear.
Mark?
I did prepare a draft agreement with our resident on Quarry Road, based on the tennis one, the basketball one. So it's.
So he
in
can
the
have a
process of-
basketball
It's on
hoop
my desk.
now.
It's in the
Okay.
process of
It's
being
in the process of being circulated for your review and comment.
Great.
I don't think I have anything. Nick, you got anything yet?
Good.
You're good.
He can't say anything until he gets an actual official name for it.
So it did arrive, and it was spelled incorrectly, not on our fault, on behalf of W. Mason, and they're supposedly rushing me a new one.
Actually, he's been paralyzed with fear since it was pointed out that he's sitting in Mike's Sullivan.
Well, I guess the party's over here. Any other comments from,
Do you want to speak at the end?
or do you want to just talk to us after the meeting? I think you just want to
After.
talk after.
After the meeting, yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Before you leave, let's make sure we've signed everything, including things we didn't all sign last week or
Okay.
2 weeks ago. And with that, I guess entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.